Chapter 52. Despicable. Many martial artists were stunned by this sudden saber strike, and then they cursed in their hearts. Such methods were indeed not honorable. Yi Guqin glanced sideways and his eyes turned cold. Even though his state of mind was already as calm as an ancient well, he still felt a little angry at such a method. Just as Yi Guqin was about to make his move, an azure sword ray shot over from another direction and collided with the saber chi. Ha! The people of the saber-sealing monarch hall are still so despicable. A faint voice sounded along with the azure sword ray. Everyone looked over and saw a young man in green robes. He had a jade-like complexion and a vigorous figure. He walked over casually with faint green sword chi circulating around him. It's Chu Qingqi from the Sword Sex Pagoda Forest. As an outstanding talent in the Sword Sex Pagoda Forest, Chu Qingqi's name was well known among the younger generation in the Saint Origin dynasty. Therefore, it was easy for others to recognize him. I didn't expect your sky and blue sky sword chi to improve again. A muscular young man in red robes walked over from the direction where the saber chi came from. He was Zhao Fengyang, a disciple of the saber-sealing monarch hall on the heavenly saber list. He looked at the indistinct green sword chi that appeared around Chu Qingqi and felt a slight fear in his heart. The saber-sealing monarch hall and the sword sex pagoda forest had fought for a long time, so they had a good understanding of each other's martial techniques. Chu Qingqi cultivated the sword sex pagoda forest's spiritual cultivation technique, the sky and blue sky technique. After cultivating this cultivation technique, one could refine the sky and blue sky sword chi that was extremely powerful. The people of the saber-sealing monarch hall are really despicable, said Chu Qingqi. Zhao Fengyang turned to look at the black-clothed man on the ground with an ugly expression. He walked over and fed the black-clothed man some healing elixirs before turning his gaze to Yi Guqin. Brother, you're really ruthless. Zhao Fengyang's voice was a little gloomy. After all, the black-clothed man had clearly stated his identity as a disciple of the saber-conferred royal hall. However, Yi Guqin didn't hold back at all. Furthermore, the black-clothed man had been reduced to such a miserable state. If news of this spread, it would affect the reputation of the saber-conferred royal hall. Then do you know that this person wanted to cripple his opponent's arm? Crippling a sword cultivator's hand is no different from killing him. I am merely giving him a taste of his own medicine. Even when facing a heavenly saber-ranking disciple like Zhao Fengyang, Yi Guqin did not show any signs of weakness. Even so, not everyone can humiliate the disciples of the saber-conferred royal palace. Zhao Fengyang took a step forward as a vigorous true chi rose from his body. His aura far surpassed that of the muscular man in black. He had already reached the 7th cycle of the chi refinement realm. Yi Guqin was not afraid in the face of such a strong pressure. The blood and chi in his body surged. Vaguely, the sound of a dragon resonating with an elephant reverberated endlessly. Ha! A 7th cycle chi refinement realm cultivator bullying an essence origin realm cultivator. How embarrassing. Just when Zhao Fengyang and Yi Guqin were at daggers drawn, azure sword chi spread out once more. A true chi pressure that wasn't any weaker than Zhao Fengyang's swept out. Zhao Fengyang's face sank slightly. Chu Qingqi, you have plenty of opportunities to fight with me. Right now, I'm dealing with someone else. Don't interfere. Zhao Fengyang snorted coldly. The Sword Sex Pagoda Forest is a Sword Dao holy land. How can I watch you bully a sword cultivator? Moreover, this little brother is standing up for a sword cultivator. Chu Qingqi still didn't back down. Good, very good. Zhao Fengyang suppressed the anger in his body. Although he wasn't afraid of Chu Qingqi, he knew that Chu Qingqi wasn't easy to deal with. He still had to challenge the sword-seeking steel and obstruct Chu Qingqi. It wasn't the right time to make a move. And for some reason, Yi Guqin also gave Zhao Fengyang a faint sense of uneasiness. He always felt that Yi Guqin wasn't simple. With Chu Qingqi obstructing him and not knowing Yi Guqin's background, Zhao Fengyang had to hold back his anger for the time being. Humph, see you at the sword-seeking steel. Zhao Fengyang exhaled deeply. He first glanced at Chu Qingqi, then stared at Yi Guqin with eyes as sharp as knives. Yi Guqin looked calm and composed, but he knew that there would be a lot of twists and turns in the sword-seeking steel. Yi Guqin didn't want to cause trouble, but he wasn't afraid of it. When the sword-seeking steel opens, it will give you a big surprise, Zhao Fengyang thought to himself with a cold expression. With Zhao Fengyang's departure, the atmosphere of the entire blood-fighting arena relaxed. However, the surrounding warriors were all looking at Yi Guqin with a look of surprise and shock. He had challenged a disciple of the saber-conferring monarch palace with his cultivation at the 9th level of the essence realm and had been defeated so miserably. Not to mention, he had a divine weapon with spiritual inscriptions and his extraordinary swordsmanship. No one would believe that such a person didn't have a background. However, this wasn't the Sky River province. Although Yi Guqin was once the leader of the Sky River's 7 prides, he wasn't famous in the Beichun prefecture. Perhaps some people had heard of the name Yi Guqin from the Sky River province, but they had never seen him with their own eyes. Therefore, not many people knew about Yi Guqin's identity. Thank you for your help. Yi Guqin cupped his hands slightly to Chu Qingqi. With his current cultivation and many trump cards, he wasn't afraid of Zhao Fengyang. But after all, Chu Qingqi had good intentions, so Yi Guqin nodded slightly. Ha, we're both sword cultivators, so this is not a big deal. I see that although your cultivation is only in the essence origin realm, your swordsmanship is superb, so you must not be a nobody, Chu Qingqi said with a faint smile. I'm just a nobody. Yi Guqin shook his head. He didn't want to expose his identity for the time being. After all, as the leader of the Sky River's 7 prides, the title of the youth sword master was quite eye-catching. Yi Guqin had come to the Beichun prefecture to carry out the Scarlet mission. Although no one knew that Yi Guqin was the sword demon, it was best to keep it a secret. Ha, all right. But you must be here for the sword-seeking steel. I believe we will meet again. Chu Qingqi smiled faintly at Yi Guqin and then turned to leave. This sword sect pagoda forest is quite extraordinary, Yi Guqin thought to himself as he watched Chu Qingqi leave. Chu Qingqi's skies and blue sky sword chi alone gave Yi Guqin a feeling of extreme sharpness. Such a martial art technique was extremely rare in the outside world, but in the sword sect pagoda forest, there seemed to be more than one martial art technique of the same level. It seems that if I want to obtain profound swordsmanship martial arts, I have to go to the 7 great forces to find them, Yi Guqin thought. Only the 7 great forces could casually possess more than one spiritual level martial arts technique. Yi Guqin suddenly thought that the elite assembly of the 10 prefectures was not too far away. When he stood out, he could choose a force to join. At present, Yi Guqin hadn't decided which force to join. But before that, Yi Guqin first needed to get rid of a stumbling block, Xia Yubing. Chapter 53. After the commotion at the blood arena, Yi Guqin returned to the inn he was staying at. Although Yi Guqin had caused quite a commotion and even beat up a disciple of the Sealed Blade Monarch Palace, the black-clothed man was clearly only an ordinary disciple in the palace. There was still a huge gap between him and Zhao Fengyang, who was ranked on the Heavenly Saber list. Therefore, at the beginning, there were people talking about Yi Guqin. After that, very few people talked about it. This was because there were too many geniuses in Desolate City. The Sword Quest tablet was about to open, and the geniuses from various factions had all gathered in Desolate City. There were countless conflicts and battles, and Yi Guqin's achievements were quickly drowned out by the news. Yi Guqin was happy with this. Otherwise, people would steal strange glances at him when he walked on the streets. In the next few days, Yi Guqin did not cultivate. Instead, he walked around and adjusted his condition to the best. He vaguely felt that the Sword Quest tablet was very important to him. He had definitely gained a lot from it. Yiguchen wandered around desolate city. For some reason, he came to the sword test stone. Yiguchen raised his head and looked at the sword test stone. He found that there were new sword marks on its surface. It should be that female sword cultivator. Yiguchen's eyes shone brightly. At the same time, there was a trace of admiration in his heart. That female sword cultivator's talent in the sword Dao was definitely extraordinary. At the same time, she was also very intelligent. The sword techniques she left on the sword test stone had clearly improved greatly. Many of the flaws had been filled in. Such a genius was extremely rare even in the Jianghu in his previous life. Every one of them would become a grandmaster level figure who founded their own sect. Of course, there were even more geniuses in this world. However, geniuses in the sword Dao were also very rare. Interesting. Yiguchen smiled. The tribulation dust sword appeared in his hand once again. It was as if he was playing a game with the female sword cultivator he had never met before. Although they had never met, Yiguchen knew that the female sword cultivator was definitely not a nobody. In fact, she might even occupy a spot on the Heaven Pride list. Yiguchen drew his sword, still using the piercing moon swordsmanship. Although it was an ungraded swordsmanship, it had been cultivated to the level of perfection. As the sword moves flowed, there was a faint feeling of returning to simplicity. If it were Yiguchen, who was only 17 years old, it would be very difficult for him to display such a simple Daoist rhyme. However, the sword demon's soul that had been in the Jianghu for more than 40 years had fused with his body. Therefore, he could display such a faint Daoist rhyme. Although I have filled in the gaps, I have yet to comprehend the essence of the swordsmanship. It only has the form but not the meaning. It is just a frame. Yiguchen shook his head lightly. After leaving another sword mark on the sword testing stone, Yiguchen left. Not long after, a figure in snow-white clothes arrived like a fairy, and her elegance carried a peerlessly beautiful and otherworldly bearing. It was precisely Situ Hongxue. This. When the beautiful fairy saw the new sword mark on the sword testing stone, her beautiful eyes widened cutely. Such a surprised expression rarely appeared on her beautiful face. Sister Hongxue, what's wrong? Could it be? Situ Hongxue followed behind her. When she saw Situ Hongxue's expression, she knew what was going on. It has been broken again. I have already filled in the gaps of the swordsmanship, but why is it still? Situ Hongxue was really surprised because her 4-season swordsmanship had been broken again by the piercing moon swordsmanship. This did not mean that the piercing moon swordsmanship was more powerful than the 4-season swordsmanship. It was just that the person who performed the piercing moon swordsmanship had a deep understanding of the piercing moon swordsmanship. Although Situ Hongxue had been cultivating the 4-season swordsmanship since she was young, she had been stuck at the higher realm. This was because it was too difficult to comprehend a spiritual level swordsmanship to the small mastery level. Even a genius in the way of the sword would need some opportunities to comprehend a spiritual level swordsmanship from a young age. Therefore, to judge whether a genius in the sword cultivation lived up to their name, one only needed to see if they had comprehended a spiritual level swordsmanship to the small mastery level. Situ Hongxue was still one step away from the small mastery level. This is not just the piercing moon swordsmanship's path of swordsmanship. It also contains a special charm. Could it be? Situ Hongxue was intelligent to begin with. Now that she had been enlightened, she felt as if the fog was gradually dispersing. Yes, it's the concept. When every swordsmanship is performed, there is a concept in addition to the moves. Otherwise, it would only be superficial. For example, in order to truly unleash the power of the 4-season swordsmanship, one must comprehend the concept of the cycle of the 4 seasons. Situ Hongxue's beautiful eyes became brighter and brighter, as if she had been enlightened. The person who left behind the moves has an unprecedented understanding of swordsmanship. At the very least, none of the seniors in the family who practiced swordsmanship had such a deep understanding of swordsmanship, Situ Hongxue muttered to herself, somewhat absent-minded. She was a person who loved swordsmanship. Now that she had met a person whose understanding of swordsmanship could be said to be at the level of a grandmaster, she was both curious and yearning. This was not the kind of yearning that she had for a grandmaster of swordsmanship, but a yearning that she had for a grandmaster of swordsmanship. To be able to have such an understanding of swordsmanship, and to have Taoist rhymes permeating every move, he must be a grandmaster of swordsmanship, Situ Hongxue thought to herself. Previously, she had been wondering whether the person who left behind the moves was a young genius or a grandmaster of swordsmanship. But today, after seeing such a return to the basics of swordsmanship, Situ Hongxue felt that it would be difficult for the younger generation to have such an understanding. She thought that it must be a grandmaster of swordsmanship. Situ Hongxue began to practice swordsmanship again. This time, she performed the 4 seasons swordsmanship. It was vaguely different from usual. As the moves of the 4 seasons alternated, it seemed as if the seasons were really rotating. Sometimes, the autumn maple would dance, and sometimes, frost and snow would fill the sky. Of course, although Situ Hongxue was smart, it would be difficult for her to improve in a short amount of time. However, she had already pointed out the direction. After that, Situ Hongxue continued to wait here. It was as if she was determined to wait for that senior. But a day passed, and still no one came. Situ Hongxue lightly stomped her feet, seemingly a little unhappy. Situ Ling was stunned. This was the first time she had seen Situ Hongxue act like a little girl. Her expression was just like a young girl waiting for her lover. However, a day later, someone came, but it was not Yiguchen. His figure was tall and handsome, and his eyebrows were sword-like. On his back, he carried a long sword that was wrapped in many bandages. The bandages were covered in some strange symbols, which seemed to be sealing runes. As this person walked, his aura permeated the air, faintly emitting a kind of fierce aura, which seemed to cause the surrounding air to solidify. However, after seeing Situ Hongxue, who was in front of the sword testing stone, that fierce aura disappeared. Like the spring wind and rain, the corners of his mouth curled up into a faint smile. Like the melting of an iceberg, this smile would definitely cause many young girls to be intoxicated. Hongxue. To be able to call out such an intimate name, there was naturally only one person. Beichen Mansion's #1 prodigy, Murong Ditian. Chapter 54. Murong Ditian's reputation in the Beichen manor was unparalleled, and he was publicly acknowledged as the #1 prodigy. At such a young age, his cultivation had already reached the 7th transformation of qi refinement. At the same time, he had also cultivated many powerful sword techniques. In all aspects, he could be said to be invincible. Different from Murong Ming, whose talent was slightly inferior, Murong Ditian had received the full nurturing of the Murong family. It should be known that if a super family used all their resources to nurture a person, even a person with ordinary talent could become a prodigy. Not to mention that Murong Ditian was a 6th-rank prodigy with extraordinary talent. Although he didn't have any innate abilities, his talent, temperament, and comprehension far surpassed ordinary prodigies. Even Yiguchen's archenemy, Xia Yubing, was only a 5th-rank prodigy. If she didn't receive the inheritance of the North River Sword King, she wouldn't even have the qualifications to be on par with Yiguchen. From this, it could be seen how extraordinary Murong Ditian was. And such a youth was the perfect Tao companion in the eyes of all the females. However, facing Murong Ditian's arrival, Situ Hongxue frowned slightly and said, "What are you doing here?" Her tone was calm, and even had a trace of indifference. The current Situ Hongxue didn't have the attitude of a little girl anymore. She appeared to be indifferent, like a goddess from the 9 heavens. "I'm just here to see my fiancé." Facing the indifferent Situ Hongxue, Murong Ditian didn't mind at all, and the corner of his mouth still carried a faint smile. "You're disturbing my sword practice." Situ Hongxue turned her head away. Although Murong Ditian could be said to be perfect in all aspects, Situ Hongxue was also a dragon among men. Naturally, she wouldn't be infatuated with Murong Ditien like other girls. Furthermore, she didn't have any feelings for Murong Ditien. It was just a marriage between two aristocratic families. No matter how aloof Situ Hongxue was, she was still a member of the Situ family. She couldn't go against the will of the entire family. Furthermore, since Situ Hongxue was born, she hadn't liked any guy. Therefore, to her, feelings were no longer important. Only the sword was where her heart was. If you want to train in the sword, I can accompany you. Murong Ditien continued to smile. Aren't you annoying? Big sister Hong Shua already said that she wants to practice the sword by herself, Situ Ling said with a frown. She was extremely disgusted with Murong Ming, and she didn't have any good impression of Murong Ditien as well. Although Murong Ditien's attitude was always warm and he always had a faint smile on his face, in the depths of his eyes, there seemed to always be a kind of indifference. In the younger generation of the Beichen manor, if I say that I am number 2 in the way of the sword, who would dare to say that they are number 1? Murong Ditien said casually. His words were very light, but they were so loud that even the deaf could hear them. And with Murong Ditien's tone, it was obvious that he wasn't being arrogant when he said those words. Instead, it was because he had absolute confidence in himself. Heh! Situ Hongxue suddenly laughed. Her smile was as beautiful as 100 flowers blooming. Even if it was Murong Ditien, his mind was also taken away by this smile, and he was stunned for an instant. However, it only lasted for an instant before it recovered. Hongxue, what are you laughing at? Murong Ditien suppressed his admiration for Situ Hongxue's beautiful smile and asked. I'm laughing at the fact that a frog in a well can't talk about the sea, and a summer insect can't talk about the ice. You will know after looking at this sword-seeking steel, Situ Hongxue shook her head. Murong Ditien walked forward and stared at the sword-seeking steel. He first casually glanced at it, then faintly frowned. He was naturally able to recognize the trajectory of Situ Hongxue's sword. However, the sword mark of the other person caused Murong Ditien to frown. Someone else came here, and it's a man. Murong Ditien's expression changed for the first time. He was no longer smiling, but had become somewhat cold and solemn. Oh, do you mind? Situ Hongxue asked. There is indeed some skill. However, there isn't a trace of true qi. Perhaps, it's just a piece of trash who only knows a little about sword arts. Murong Ditien's expression was incomparably indifferent. He had long viewed Situ Hongxue as his exclusive property and wouldn't allow anyone to touch her, even if it was just getting close to her. In Murong Ditien's eyes, he didn't need Situ Hongxue to practice his sword arts. Situ Hongxue only needed to be a canary in a cage for him to enjoy and play with. You are jealous. Jealous of this person's comprehension towards the way of the sword, Situ Hongxue's words were filled with sarcasm. Humph, what kind of sword art is this? Watch as I break it with brute force. The aura around Murong Ditien's body suddenly exploded, and the true qi of the 7th transformation of qi refinement was emitted without restraint. At the same time, the sword that was wrapped in bandages on his back suddenly leaped up and landed in Murong Ditien's hand. Mysterious Heaven Sword Art, break. Murong Ditien waved his sword. That long sword was still wrapped in bandages, but an incomparably valiant sword qi was released. Majestic and fearful, the sword qi was like the judgment of the heavens as it landed on the sword testing stone. Previously, Murong Ming had also executed the mysterious Heaven Sword Art, but compared to Murong Ditien, the sword art that Murong Ming executed was like a child playing house. An incomparably thick and deep sword mark slashed across the entire sword testing stone from top to bottom. Almost all of the sword marks on the sword testing stone were erased by this sword mark. It had to be known that this was an incomparably hard basalt rock. To be able to leave such a sword mark on basalt rock, it could be seen how powerful Murong Ditien's sword was. What are you doing? Situ Hongxue's expression suddenly changed. She still wanted to comprehend the concept of the sword on the sword testing stone, but in the end, her sword was destroyed by Murong Ditian. You only need to comprehend my concept of the sword. Murong Ditian's words were domineering and incomprehensible. You are unreasonable. Situ Hongshua's delicate face was slightly pale, and her brows were tightly knitted. You will eventually understand me. After we pass the sword-seeking stone, it will be our wedding day. Have a good rest. Murong Ditian flicked his sleeves and left. If I encounter the person who left a sword mark on the sword-testing stone, no matter who you are, you will die. Murong Ditian coldly said in his heart. Big sister Hongxue, that Murong Ditian is really too much. You won't be happy if you marry him. Situ Ling gritted her teeth and said angrily. Sigh, the fate of the clan is difficult. Father secretly told me that my Situ clan seems to be coveted by many people. Only by forming a marriage alliance with the Murong clan can we obtain a chance of survival. Situ Hongxue closed her beautiful eyes, and there was a painful expression between her brows, causing others to feel pity for her. It was very obvious that the rise and fall of a clan needed to be shouldered by a woman. This burden was a bit too heavy. However, Situ Hongxue didn't escape, and she shouldered it all by herself. It's a pity that the sword-testing stone has been destroyed, and the concept is gone. Situ Hongxue felt that it was a pity, and at the same time, she felt guilty. She knew that the person who left the sword mark had the intention to give her pointers, but now, it was destroyed by Murong Ditian. In the end, Situ Hongxue sighed. She raised her jade hand and took out a hairpin from her hair. It was as gentle as jade, and it even had the fragrance of Situ Hongshue's hair. Big sister Hongxue, you. Situ Ling opened her eyes wide, and was incomparably shocked. Situ Hongxue actually left her personal accessory behind. This action was very unusual. Even Murong Ditian hadn't received any of Situ Hongshue's personal accessories before. Furthermore, that hairpin wasn't just an accessory. It seems that although big sister Hongxue didn't meet that person, a mark has already been left in her heart. Situ Ling sighed, and she didn't know if this was good or bad. Soon after, Situ Hongxue and Situ Ling both left. Another day passed, and Yiguchen came to this place again. Chapter 55. Yiguchen was curious. He wanted to see if the female sword cultivator would comprehend anything else. But when he saw the vertical sword mark on the sword test rock, his expression changed slightly. What a domineering sword path. Yiguchen sighed inwardly. This sword move was extremely ferocious and domineering. It was definitely not an ordinary sword art. It was definitely a spirit-level sword art, and its grade was probably not low even among the spirit-level sword arts. Yiguchen thought to himself, the person who attacked with the sword has superb swordsmanship and a solid foundation. However, his sword moves are too sharp. Obviously, he is from the younger generation. However, looking at this sword move, it is obvious that he is venting his anger by destroying all my sword moves. Suddenly, he found something under the sword test rock. He picked it up and saw that it was a woman's hairpin. The hairpin was like jade and had a lingering fragrance that filled his nose. Looks like it was left by the female sword cultivator. Yiguchen thought. He did not want to leave it because he was just following fate and did not want to get involved. But in the next moment, Yiguchen was surprised. He infused a wisp of profound qi into the hairpin. The hairpin that looked like it was carved from jade suddenly released a circle of light. This circle of white light was like a halo behind the head of a Buddha. It enveloped Yiguchen's body. It's a supreme-grade defensive spiritual weapon. Yiguchen was dumbfounded. A defensive spiritual weapon was more precious than an offensive spiritual weapon. Moreover, it was a supreme-grade defensive spiritual weapon. The only supreme-grade defensive spiritual weapon that Yiguchen had seen was the red-haired ghost's shield. After some hesitation, Yiguchen accepted it. He knew that this was the female sword cultivator's way of repaying him. Because of Yiguchen's advice, she had benefited greatly. In terms of value, it was indeed not lower than this defensive spiritual weapon. Looks like the female sword cultivator's background is not ordinary. Yiguchen thought inwardly. The sword test rock had been destroyed. There was no point in leaving a sword mark. Yiguchen shook his head slightly and left. There was nothing to be regretful about. He had just done it casually. After leaving the sword testing rock, Yiguchen returned to his inn. A few days later, when the light of the celestial arch sword shone through the window and onto the ground, Yiguchen, who was sitting cross-legged on his bed, suddenly sensed something. He opened his eyes, opened the window, and looked into the distance. The Desolation City wasn't far from the Great Desolation Forest. Yiguchen seemed to be able to see an unparalleled pressure of the Sword Realm sweeping out from a towering mountain in the depths of the Great Desolation Forest. That sword intent seemed to disregard even the will of the heavens and earth as it looked down upon the universe and shook the heavens. An absolute master of the way of the sword. Yiguchen frowned. He could feel the powerful sword will. After coming to this world, there were not many people that Yiguchen recognized as powerful in the way of the sword. This was the second one. The first was naturally the blood-listening tower's master who had never shown himself, and only a strand of the sword insight contained within the sound of his flute. At this moment, the entire Desolation City was in an uproar because the sword-seeking steel in the Great Desolation Forest had finally opened again. Within the city, countless people swarmed out and headed towards the Great Desolation Forest. It could be said that as long as one could obtain a seat at the sword-seeking steel, one's name would definitely spread far and wide in the Beichen mansion, not to mention the opportunity to obtain many opportunities. Yiguchen did not delay either. He put on his bamboo hat and headed straight for the Great Desolation Forest. The Great Desolation Forest was about the same size as the Cloud Valley mountain range, but it was more desolate and ancient. There was no lack of third and fourth rank demonic beasts in the depths of the forest. Some of the demonic beasts were even feared by divine soul realm experts. Within the forest, the vegetation was dense and the huge trees towered into the sky. Sunlight could only pass through a few gaps, casting incomplete spots on the ground, causing the dark forest to appear even more deathly silent and cold. With the opening of the sword-seeking steel, the originally deathly silent Great Desolation Forest suddenly became noisy. Many geniuses entered the forest, wanting to reach the mountain peak where the sword-seeking steel was. From time to time, there would be miserable cries echoing from various parts of the forest. Those were the geniuses who encountered powerful demonic beasts and lost their lives in the mouths of demonic beasts. Of course, there were also some true geniuses who were not afraid of these demonic beasts. They walked through the Great Desolation Forest as if they were taking a stroll in the park. Looks like I will definitely have a seat at the sword-seeking steel this time. A young man wearing a black and white robe casually killed a second-rank demonic beast with a proud smile on his face. He was the limitless sword sex Lu Tianying. I will obtain first place at the sword-seeking steel. Situ Hongxue, I will let you know that only I am worthy of you. Murong Ditian walked casually within the forest, and he did not even draw his sword. As he flipped his palm, countless sword chi soared into the sky and tore apart the surrounding demonic beasts, causing blood to fill the sky. I wonder if anyone will be able to obtain the sword-seeking steel's approval this time. In another place, Chu Qingqi was dressed in green. Green sword chi surged around his body, making it difficult for demonic beasts to get close to him. In the central region of the Great Desolation Forest, a scarlet demonic python was entrenched beside a small tree. There were bright red fruits on the tree trunk. Whoosh! A sword light suddenly shot towards the scarlet demonic python. The demonic python hissed and spat out a dense scarlet poisonous fog. However, that sword light directly tore apart the poisonous fog and chopped off the demonic python's head. Even the demonic python did not have time to react to such a swift sword light. A black-robed figure landed beside the small tree. It was Yiguchen. Snake saliva fruit, a rare supreme grade spirit medicine. Yiguchen lifted his hand and plucked a few snake saliva fruits. His current cultivation was already at the 9th level of the essence realm. He was not far from the chi refining realm. However, he would only enter the chi refining realm after he broke through to the perfect physical body. Therefore, Yiguchen also needed to gather and prepare some spirit medicine to assist him in cultivating the perfect physical body. Although there were many dangers in the Great Desolation Forest, it was also a land of treasures. There was no lack of rare and exotic fruits, which were very useful for cultivation. At the same time, Yiguchen continued to hone his swordsmanship, especially the piercing moon swordsmanship. When Yiguchen performed it, he felt a sense of carefreeness. He felt that this swordsmanship could continue to be improved. If he had an epiphany, it was possible for him to practice it to the perfection of martial arts. After that, Yiguchen continued to hone his swordsmanship and collect all kinds of rare treasures. As for the sword-seeking steel, he was not in a hurry. Not everyone could sit on those seats. After a day, a piece of news suddenly spread in the Great Desolation Forest. In a deep valley, someone had found an extremely rare material, the meteorite iron. As soon as the news came out, everyone was shocked. The meteorite iron was a precious material for forging magic weapons with spiritual inscriptions. Its characteristic was that it could bear the power of many spiritual inscriptions. It should be known that the power of a magic weapon with spiritual inscriptions mainly came from the spiritual inscriptions. The more spiritual inscriptions there were, the stronger the power of the magic weapon with spiritual inscriptions would be. However, the more spiritual inscriptions there were, the more power it would bring. If an ordinary material exceeded the limit it could bear, it would collapse. In other words, the casting material could not bear the power of more spiritual inscriptions. However, the meteorite iron was special in that it could bear the power of spiritual inscriptions very well. If a magic weapon with spiritual inscriptions could only bear one spiritual inscription, then after adding a little meteorite iron, it could bear 2 or more spiritual inscriptions. This showed how precious it was. Let's go and have a look. Yiguchen was collecting materials to forge a soft sword, and obviously, he could not miss the meteorite iron. Chapter 56. In a valley in the Great Wild Forest, there were many people. Many cultivators had rushed over after hearing the news. They all wanted to find the rare meteorite iron in the deep valley. Outside the valley, Yiguchen landed on the crown of an ancient tree and looked at the valley not far away. Although the news had spread, it was obviously not so easy to find it. Everyone in the valley, leave within 10 breaths. A loud shout spread throughout the valley. A group of people came to the entrance of the valley. The leader was dressed in a black and white robe with a sun and moon pattern embroidered on his chest. It was Lu Tianying of the Limitless Sword Sect. The people behind him were also dressed in the robes of the Limitless Sword Sect. Although their auras were not as strong as his, they were comparable to the heaven's prides of a prefecture. Although the meteorite iron is extremely precious, there should be no shortage of this treasure in the Limitless Sword Sect. What is this Lu Tianying trying to do? Yiguchen frowned slightly, sensing that things were not simple. After Lu Tianying spoke, some cultivators also secretly cursed and left. Although they were extremely unwilling, the Limitless Sword Sect was too powerful and there was no way to resist. After the miscellaneous people were expelled, Lu Tianying and the others entered the valley. Yiguchen's expression changed. He used the willow catkin wind movement technique and quietly sneaked in. He did not make a move. Instead, he waited for Lu Tianying and the others. "Senior brother Lu, I found it." A voice sounded. It was a disciple of the Limitless Sword Sect. He found a hidden cracked rock under the cover of grass and trees. There were some silver-like metal minerals scattered around. It was the meteorite iron. "Ha, I really found it." Lu Tianying's eyes were filled with joy. Yiguchen, who was in the dark, watched attentively. At this moment, a figure flashed in the air and directly rushed to the cracked rock. With a wave of his sleeve, he took the meteorite iron into his bag. It's him. Yiguchin narrowed his eyes. A figure appeared. He was dressed in a golden robe and had a round figure with a sword at his waist. It was the little fatty of unknown origin from the auction. It's you again. Lu Tianying glared. Thank you. The little fatty smiled cheekily as he looked at Lu Tianying. He was not in a hurry to run because he knew that Lu Tianying could not catch up with his speed. So you think you can leave? The anger on Lu Tianying's face suddenly disappeared and was replaced by a sneer. Little fatty was stunned. He felt that the development of the situation was somewhat beyond his expectations. Let's go. With a thought, little fatty didn't stay any longer. Golden light flickered beneath his feet as he flashed away. At this moment, the ground suddenly lit up. It was a formation rune that flowed on the ground like ripples. A powerful sealing force soared into the sky, forming a dense chain of sealing chains that locked the little fatty within. It's a little overkill to use a low-class human-level sealing formation on you. An old voice sounded. An old man with white hair and beard walked out from the dense forest. It was Master Gu, who had been angered by the little fatty. Beside him was the Divine Soul Realm expert. Little fatty's face instantly turned ugly. It's a low-class human-level formation. Yiguchin, who was hiding in the dark, could not help but be shocked. The little Ashura sword formation he had was also a low-class human-level formation, but its function was different from this formation. This formation focused on sealing, which was obviously to restrain the little fatty's strange speed. As for the so-called meteorite iron, it was obviously a trap set up by Lu Tianying and Master Gu to capture the little fatty. Are you guys bent on messing with yours truly? Little fatty placed his hands behind his back with an unfathomable look on his face. However, with his chubby face, which even looked a little rich, it was out of place no matter how one looked at it. Just deliberately mystifying. Lu Tianying sneered. We'll capture you today and wash away the shame of that day. The Divine Soul Realm expert beside Master Gu also stared coldly at the little fatty. As a Divine Soul Realm expert, it was the first time he had been so humiliated. Don't force me to draw my sword, or you'll regret it. The little fatty said with a serious face. Oh, sword. What sword? Lu Tianying's face was full of disdain. The Limitless Sword Sect was a sword sect, and Lu Tianying boasted that the Limitless Sword Sect was the #1 sword sect in the Saint Origin dynasty. He had seen all kinds of famous swords and sword techniques, so he was naturally disdainful of the little fatty. Sigh, you really don't understand. My sword is called my truth. It's a sword that pursues the great Tao and seeks the true self. The little fatty slowly pressed his hand on the sword hilt at his waist. My truth sword. Lu Tianying murmured. That's right, you're really cheap. The little fatty said with compassion. Lu Tianying was stunned for a moment, and his face immediately flushed red. Are you playing with me? Lu Tianying was furious. He did not say anything else and directly attacked. His true chi turned into sword chi and slashed at the little fatty. On the other side, the Divine Soul Realm expert also attacked. His true chi condensed, and his hand pressed down on the little fatty. Unsheath my truth. With a sword in hand, I'm invincible. The little fatty howled. Golden light flashed under his feet, and he directly flashed to the other side. He then pulled out his sword and slashed at the sealing formation on the ground. It did not look like he was using a sword, but more like a farmer chopping firewood. However, the sealing formation was obviously not something that could be broken in a short time. Lu Tianying and the Divine Soul Realm expert had already attacked again. The little fatty relied on his mysterious body movement to hold on while trying his best to break the formation. Yiguchin, who was hiding in the dark, saw this and shook his head. Although he was very interested in the little fatty's mysterious silver heavy water, it was obviously very difficult to get it under the current circumstances. Boom! Lu Tianying once again pointed his sword finger at the little fatty. Luo Tian protection. Little fatty let out a cry, and his entire body surged with light. Vaguely, an illusory figure formed around him. It was like the guardian Vajra of Buddhism, and it enveloped little fatty's body. Rumble. The sword finger fell on the guardian Vajra's illusory figure, but only a rumbling sound erupted, and it did not break through its defense. Damn it, it was originally mine. Just give it back to me. Lu Tianying's expression became even more gloomy when he saw the little fatty display Luo Tian protection. The Luo Tian protection was originally his, but the little fatty snatched it away. Now that he saw the little fatty display it, Lu Tianying's heart itched with hatred. However, although the little fatty had Luo Tian protection, there was another divine soul realm expert besides Lu Tianying. 9 Extreme Golden Palm. The divine soul realm expert finally decided not to delay any longer. Extremely vigorous genuine qi surged out of his body and gathered in his palm. The dark golden palm of qi almost covered the entire ceiling array formation as it grabbed at little fatty. Rumble. Even with the Luo Tian protection, the little fatty was directly knocked over, and the guardian Vajra's illusory figure on the surface of his body disappeared. The attack of a divine soul realm expert was so powerful. The little fatty's face was a little ugly, and he muttered to himself, "It wasn't easy for me to sneak out. Do I have to go back again?" No, just when the little fatty was in a critical situation, he seemed to sense an obscure sword essence. "Hey, brother, help me." A divine thought was quietly transmitted to Yiguchen's mind in the dark. Chapter 57. Yiguchen raised his eyebrows. Divine sense transmission was a skill that only experts above the divine soul realm could use. The little fatty obviously hadn't reached the divine soul realm, but he had such a skill. In Yiguchen's eyes, the seemingly unreliable little fatty became somewhat mysterious. "Why should I save you?" Yiguchen thought. "I can sense a sword concept from your body. You're a sword cultivator, right? As the saying goes, when you see injustice on the road, you should draw your sword to help. Isn't this what a righteous swordsman should do?" The little fatty hurriedly said as he dodged in a sorry state. Yiguchen turned around and was about to leave. "Hey, brother, don't be like this. What do you want?" The little fatty shouted anxiously. "The mysterious silver heavy water, the protection of all heaven, a portion of the meteorite iron, and that mysterious movement skill of yours," Yiguchen said to himself. "What? Are you trying to skin this young master?" Little fatty shrieked in his spiritual sense. Yiguchen also felt that he might have gone too far, but on second thought, if he wanted to save the little fatty, he would have to bear the anger of Lu Tianying and Master Gu. Obviously, the price he had to pay was not small. "I can't pass on my movement skill to you, but I can give you the rest," the little fatty said, clenching his teeth. The mysterious and unpredictable secret technique was one of his trump cards. Moreover, he wouldn't divulge it to anyone else. So, he would rather die than give it to Yiguchen. Although the mysterious silver heavy water and the meteorite iron were precious, they were nothing compared to his life. As for the protection of all heaven, he had already practiced it, so he didn't mind giving it to Yiguchen. "Okay." Yiguchen nodded slightly. Although he didn't want to cause too much trouble for Lu Tianying, with the relationship between Lu Tianying and Murong Ming, it was hard to guarantee that there wouldn't be any friction in the future. In that case, it was better to get some benefits for himself now. In order to forge a flexible sword and practice the hard-soft sword essence as soon as possible, Yiguchen was willing to pay a price. "Deal. Brother, all you need to do is break the weak point of the ceiling formation. Then, we'll attack together." Fatty sent a secret vocal transmission to Qin Feng. Yiguchen nodded slightly. His origin ring flashed, and tribulation dust quietly entered his hand. The profound qi in his body was brewing. Jia Chen's vessel meridians were lit up one by one. At the same time, the sharp-edged spirit tattoo was quietly accumulating power. Now! Little Fatty suddenly let out a loud roar. He raised his true sword and stabbed it towards a weak corner of the ceiling array formation. Yi Guqin made his move as well. 42 vessel meridians of the Calamity Dust sword lit up. At the same time, the broken edge spirit mark was activated. The extremely sharp sword light almost tore through the air. A waning moon swept out. The ultimate move of the piercing moon sword technique, Moonfall. After Yi Guqin had cultivated the moon-piercing sword technique to the perfect melder realm, the power of his sword technique had increased exponentially. Naturally, the power of his ultimate move had increased as well. At this moment, the sword slashed out like a crescent moon in the sky. In addition to the enhancement of the broken edge spiritual tattoo, the sharpness of the sword light was unparalleled. A violent whistling sound erupted in the air, as if the air was being split open. Boom! Yi Guqin's Calamity Dust sword and Little Fatty's true sword both pointed at the weak spot of the array formation at the same time. The originally tight array formation instantly cracked. Then, to the surprise of Lu Tianying and the others, it suddenly exploded into light spots that filled the sky. Let's go! Little Fatty still had some conscience. He grabbed Yi Guqin's hand. Golden light flashed under their feet, and the two of them instantly flashed hundreds of feet away. This. Lu Tianying and the others were stunned for a moment. It seemed that they had not yet reacted because all of this happened too suddenly and too quickly. There was no time for them to react at all. But then, Lu Tianying and Master Gu both let out angry roars. They racked their brains and even took out a precious material like the meteorite iron, just to use it as bait to lure Little Fatty into the trap. Originally, things had indeed developed according to their plan. However, halfway through, a man in a bamboo hat had appeared. That kid actually has an accomplice. Lu Tianying instinctively regarded Yi Guqin as Little Fatty's accomplice. Damn it, we even lost this old man's meteorite iron. Master Gu wanted to cry but had no tears. Didn't I also lose the ceiling array? Lu Tianying's face was also ugly, and he was furious. Even in the Limitless Sword sect, this kind of ceiling array was not so easy to obtain. Lu Tianying had also completed many sect missions to be able to receive the reward of the ceiling array. Just as Lu Tianying, Master Gu, and the others were pounding their chests in anger, Yi Guqin and Little Fatty had already found a safe and remote cave. Little Fatty was panting heavily, and he felt a lingering fear. Yi Guqin was fine. He was wearing a bamboo hat, so Lu Tianying and the others probably did not see through him. Brother, thank you very much. Little Fatty chuckled. After experiencing a life-and-death situation just now, he was now acting as if nothing had happened. Yi Guqin even suspected that with Little Fatty's temperament, how could he survive alone until now? However, although Little Fatty had many secrets, Yi Guqin did not intend to ask. It had nothing to do with him. It's no problem. We're just taking what we need. Yi Guqin's nature was somewhat indifferent. He did not care about anything other than the sword Dao. Little Fatty did not mind and handed over the mysterious silver heavy water, meteorite iron, and the protection of Luo Tian's scroll. After Yi Guqin took it, he nodded slightly. Little Fatty gave him 5 drops of mysterious silver heavy water, which was enough as an auxiliary material to refine the soft sword. There was also a fist-sized piece of meteorite iron. As for the protection of Luo Tian, Yi Guqin believed that as long as he learned this defensive martial art, his strength would skyrocket again. Ordinary Qi refinement realm warriors would no longer be a threat to him. I'll be in seclusion here to cultivate the protection of Luo Tian. What about you? Yi Guqin asked. Of course I'll continue to go out and have fun. Little Fatty said heartlessly. I might not be able to save you next time. Yi Guqin said. If they dare to provoke me again, I'll risk being scolded and ask Master to destroy that limitless sword sect. Little Fatty said indifferently. Yi Guqin's eyes dimmed. He did not say anything. He did not intend to ask Little Fatty. Little Fatty left. Yi Guqin prepared to cultivate the protection of Luo Tian. One day later, in the cave, Yi Guqin's eyes were clear. The profound qi in his body surged. Mist surrounded his body, faintly condensing into the shadow of a guardian Vajra. However, this shadow was even more illusory than Little Fatty's. It was almost in the form of mist. Even so, it still had a certain degree of defensive power. After all, Little Fatty's protection of Luo Tian had blocked a martial art from a divine soul realm warrior. At present, Yi Guqin's protection of Luo Tian could at least block the attack of an ordinary Qi refinement realm warrior. Of course, this was also because Yi Guqin had only cultivated the protection of Luo Tian for a short time. When he was proficient in it and broke through to the Qi refinement realm, he could begin to exert the effect of the protection of Luo Tian. In this way, I have one more layer of protection. Yi Guqin smiled faintly. He dispersed the shadow and walked out of the cave. He continued to rush into the great wild forest. At the same time, he used many demonic beasts to practice his swordsmanship. His piercing moon sword art had reached the top of perfection. At the same time, his boundless heaven sword art was close to the small completion. Faintly, Yi Guqin felt that he only needed an opportunity to comprehend the essence of these two sword arts. And that opportunity was naturally the sword-seeking steel. Chapter 58. Finally, one day later, Yi Guqin approached the Sky Sword Peak. Before reaching the area of the Sky Sword Peak, Yi Guqin felt an extremely strong sword pressure from dozens of miles away. It was mighty and overwhelming. Some of the weaker cultivators would probably feel uncomfortable here. Within dozens of miles of the Sky Sword Peak, there were no demonic beasts. Because the sword chi pressure was too strong, no demonic beast could stay here for a long time. Yi Guqin looked around. Vaguely, there were sparse figures flying towards the Sky Sword Peak. Those who could reach here were all unique geniuses. They could not be underestimated. Let's go. Yi Guqin did not hesitate at all. Instead, there was a hint of excitement in his eyes. He could faintly sense an otherworldly sword intent from this sword pressure, and it was of great reference and inspiration to him. As time went by, Yi Guqin got closer to the Sky Sword Peak. 30 miles, 20 miles, 10 miles, finally, the Sky Sword Peak was right in front of him. Yi Guqin looked over and saw the Sky Sword Peak towering into the clouds. It was hundreds of feet high, like a stone sword. On the peak, he could vaguely see a stone tablet covered with countless sword scars. It stood tall with a sense of vicissitudes. The pressure of the sword chi here could not be underestimated. The mighty sword chi was like an invisible wave, surging in all directions. Moreover, the sword chi pressure would strengthen or weaken according to one's cultivation. Yi Guqin was only in the essence realm, so the sword essence pressure was still bearable for him. Most importantly, the sword essence pressure not only suppressed the physical body, but also had a slight impact on the soul. If a sword cultivator had a deep understanding of the sword principle, he would be able to bear the pressure better. Therefore, the sword-seeking steel was a great opportunity for a sword cultivator. Yi Guqin began to climb the Sky Sword Peak. It was hundreds of feet high. Normally, it would not be difficult for a warrior to climb the Sky Sword Peak. However, under the pressure of the powerful sword essence, it was not that simple. Even Yi Guqin's forehead was covered in sweat, let alone the others. However, Yi Guqin seemed to have felt some kind of mystery from the sword essence pressure. The closer he got to the peak, the more intense the mysterious feeling became. I'll definitely have a spot on the sword-seeking steel. Suddenly, a figure broke through the air. Genuine chi burst out from his body as he flew towards the peak. It's him. Yi Gu-chen looked over. That person was Lu Tianying of the Wuji sword sect. Lu Tianying was so focused on climbing that he didn't notice Yi Gu-chen in the corner. At the same time, a faint laughter was heard from the other side. A young man dressed in green stood with his hands behind his back. Green sword chi flowed around his body. He seemed to still have some strength left and was quite calm. This person was naturally Chu Qing-chi of the Sword Sect's Forest of Towers. Humph, what sword essence? It's just so. Zhao Fengyang of the Sealed Saber Monarch Hall appeared with a disdainful look. The appearance of the god-favored sons caused a wave of exclamations. They were the ones who had the strength to compete for the 5 spots on the sword-seeking steel. You're a saber cultivator. What's the point of coming to the sword-seeking steel? Chu Qingqi stared at Zhao Fengyang. Ha, wouldn't it be great if I, a saber cultivator, occupy a spot on the sword-seeking steel? Zhao Fengyang laughed with disdain. Then let's wait and see. Chu Qingqi's eyes darkened and he did not say anything else. Humph, I'll give you a big surprise today, Zhao Fengyang said coldly in his heart. The geniuses of the major forces joined hands and soon, they were halfway up the mountain. Yi Gu-chen was still not in a hurry. He followed his own pace and at the same time, he was carefully comprehending the mystery contained in the pressure of the sword chi. I'll definitely take a spot on the sword-seeking steel. Suddenly, a cold and arrogant voice sounded. Although the voice was not loud, it seemed to resound in everyone's ears. That's... Everyone looked over and saw 2 figures approaching. Yi Gu-chen also looked over. He was familiar with one of the figures. It was Murong Ming. The other man walking in front had a stalwart figure. He walked with a majestic gait and carried a long sword wrapped in bandages on his back. His gaze was cold and arrogant as he looked around. Almost no one dared to look him in the eye. Murong Ditian of the Murong family. He's really here. Some warriors whispered. He's Murong Ditian. Yi Gu-chen thought to himself. At the same time, his eyes focused on the long sword on Murong Ditian's back. He could feel that the long sword was extraordinary. He was an opponent. Yi Gu-chen thought to himself. No wonder he was the #1 son of heaven in Beichen Mansion. He was indeed imposing. Right when everyone was still in shock, another 2 beautiful figures flashed over like ripples. Yi Gu-chen was also familiar with one of them. It was Situ Ling. As for the other person, even Yi Gu-chen, who had a calm temperament, was stunned when he saw her. That lady was wearing a snow-colored silk dress. She was pure and had a delicate figure. She was like a cloud that covered the moon. She was dazzling and looked like snow that was blown by the wind. The most stunning thing was her flawless face. It was like a painting, causing people to linger. It's Situ Hongxue. She's indeed one of the beauties of the Saint Origin dynasty. Many warriors exclaimed in surprise. Their eyes were filled with infatuation. Who wouldn't want to take such a beauty into their arms? But when they saw Murong Ditian, who was not far away, their hearts turned cold. Although Situ Hongxue was a beauty, she was already taken. These people didn't have the courage to snatch her from Murong Ditian. Hongxue, do you need me to reserve a seat for you? Murong Ditian asked gently when he saw Situ Hongxue. The surrounding warriors were speechless. They didn't even have the qualifications to fight for a seat. Murong Ditian actually had the qualifications to say such words. They couldn't help but sigh at the difference in status. No need. I will fight for it myself. Situ Hongxue wasn't a flower vase that relied on others. She also had her own pride. She directly refused and started to ascend the heavenly sword peak. Murong Ditian smiled faintly and followed closely behind. Seems like it's not that easy to obtain a seat. Yi Gu-chen thought to himself. He didn't ascend to the front. Firstly, it was too conspicuous. Secondly, it was because he still needed to carefully comprehend the profoundness of the sword pressure. Although the sword chi that was released from the sword seek steel gave people extreme pressure, it also gave people a kind of comprehension. The deeper one's understanding of the sword Tao, the stronger one's comprehension would be. The person who left behind this sword seek steel must be a peerless expert in the sword Tao. This sword pressure is terrifying. If I could gather the sword intent of heaven and earth into one, I would have no regrets if I could personally witness it being executed. Ye Guqin couldn't help but sigh inwardly. Within this sword intent, there was a trace of an expert's loneliness. It was very similar to the sword devil in his previous life. After entering this kind of comprehension, even Ye Guqin didn't notice that the sword pressure was getting weaker and weaker. Ye Guqin's figure was also getting faster and faster. His eyes were also getting brighter and brighter. Ye Guqin already had some comprehension. Finally, Ye Guqin, who gradually stood out, attracted some people's attention. Chapter 59. Hey, who's that? How can he be so fast? Yeah, we can't even move an inch in the sky sword peak. We're practically moving, but he's the only one who's moving as if he's flying. Some of the sword cultivators were stunned when they saw Ye Guqin's swift figure. Then, they were shocked. Ye Guqin was immersed in a state of comprehension. Although his body was like a swimming dragon, his consciousness was immersed in comprehending the pressure of the sword chi. He naturally didn't know how extraordinary his current performance was. Soon, Ye Guqin gradually caught up with the top few geniuses. Who's that? Zhao Fengyang was the first to notice Ye Guqin. When he looked over, his face instantly darkened. Although Ye Guqin was wearing a bamboo hat, Zhao Fengyang recognized him. He was the sword cultivator who had beaten up the disciples of the saber-conferred royal palace on the blood arena. Zhao Fengyang didn't expect that Ye Guqin would dare to challenge the sword inquiry steel with his profound origin realm cultivation. Good lad, I'll start with you. Zhao Fengyang licked his lips with a fierce look in his eyes. His purpose in coming to the sword inquiry steel was to obstruct Chu Qingqi of the sword sect Pagoda Forest and suppress the other sword cultivators. However, Ye Guqin's appearance gave him a target to show off. Ha! Genuine qi surged around Zhao Fengyang's body. His seventh transformation qi refinement realm cultivation was enough to make him an elite. Although he was ranked at the bottom of the heavenly saber list in the saber-conferred royal palace, his strength was definitely not weak. He held the 9 orifices golden saber on his back in his hand and infused his genuine qi into it. The entire golden saber instantly emitted a dazzling golden light. Golden Lion Saber Technique, Break Lion Shadow. Zhao Fengyang also used the Golden Lion Saber Technique. However, compared to the Golden Lion Saber Technique used by the black-clothed man, Zhao Fengyang's technique was obviously more powerful. Boom! An extremely dazzling saber radiance swept towards Ye Guqin. The surrounding martial artists were all stunned. They also did not expect that Zhao Fengyang would actually suddenly make a move. Furthermore, it was against an unknown person. Brother, be careful. On the other side, Chu Qingqi caught a glimpse and shouted. He had been paying attention to Zhao Fengyang's every move. When he saw Zhao Fengyang make a move, he hurriedly warned Ye Guqin. Ye Guqin, who was currently comprehending the concept of sword, suddenly felt an intense pressure. He suddenly came to his senses and looked at the blade that was right in front of him. Not only was there no fear in his eyes, they were instead filled with anger. That's right, it was anger. When Ye Guqin woke up, his comprehension of the sword chi pressure also disappeared. Originally, Ye Guqin was confident that he would be able to reach a deeper level in many of his sword techniques by relying on this comprehension. But now, it had been interrupted. Obstructing my path of sword comprehension, you must die. Ye Guqin's roar was like a thunderclap from the 9th heaven. Ye Guqin had always been calm and indifferent, and he rarely got angry. But when it came to the way of the sword, Yiguchen would not show any mercy. Clang! The dust of calamity was unsheathed, and the sword was pointed at the sky. Split lightning sword's ultimate move, thunder roar. Yiguchen lit up all 42 of Jia Chen's sword veins. In an instant, sword chi filled the sky while lightning shook the earth. A wisp of peerless sword chi and lightning collided with the golden blade light. Powerful ripples of sword chi and saber chi spread out in all directions, causing the surrounding rocks to tumble down. Many martial artists were sent flying by the shock waves of the chi waves. The first exchange of blows was earth-shattering. In the distance, Chu Qingqi's expression changed slightly. Zhao Fengyang was a ruthless person on the heavenly blade list of the sealed saber royal palace. Although his ranking was low, he was definitely not someone an Essence Realm martial artist could contend with. Even if Chu Qingqi made a move, it would be difficult for him to gain any advantage over Zhao Fengyang. However, after a burst of smoke and dust dispersed, what they saw in front of them stunned everyone. Yiguchen's figure stood tall like a pine tree. The golden light on the surface of his body was faintly discernible, and he was not injured at all. How is this possible? A martial artist in the Essence Realm is actually on par with Zhao Fengyang? Some martial artists were stunned and could not believe it. The shock wave naturally alarmed Lu Tianying, Murong Ditian, and Situ Hongxue. It's him. Lu Tianying squinted his eyes. He naturally recognized Yiguchen as the person who helped little Fatty that day. However, he did not make a move directly because he still had to save his energy to obtain a seat on the Sword Quest tablet. As for Yiguchen, Zhao Fengyang would deal with him, so there was no need for him to make a move. Murong Ditian's gaze was indifferent from the beginning. Regardless of whether it was Zhao Fengyang or the man in bamboo hat, they were unable to threaten him. Situ Hongshue's gaze also did not fluctuate. Although Yiguchen blocked Zhao Fengyang's attack with his Essence Realm cultivation, it was just a casual attack from Zhao Fengyang. As for Situ Ling and Murong Ming, when they looked at Yiguchen's figure, they vaguely felt a trace of familiarity, but they did not have any impression of it. Well, he actually blocked it. Zhao Fengyang was also stunned. Even an ordinary Qi refining grandmaster would find it difficult to block his attack, let alone an Essence Realm cultivator. However, Yiguchen blocked it. You have angered me. Yiguchen's gaze was as sharp as sword light, and his tone was low. Oh, angered? You are just an Essence Realm cultivator. What qualifications do you have to talk to me like this? Zhao Fengyang sneered, his face full of disdain. Yiguchen did not say anything more. He held the calamity dust and attacked with his sword. Aurora Quick Sword's unique skill, Aurora's passing. Fast. Too fast. Everyone only felt a flash of sword light. It was extremely dazzling and as beautiful as the aurora in the sky. However, it arrived in front of Zhao Fengyang in an instant. Well, how is this possible? Zhao Fengyang was shocked by the speed of Yiguchen's sword. He blocked it with his 9 orifices golden saber. Clang! A deafening explosion rang out, and Zhao Fengyang was actually forced back a few steps. That swordsmanship. Most of the martial artists who came to challenge the sword-seeking steel were sword cultivators. When they saw Yiguchen attack, they were all shocked. That was a Xiantian swordsmanship. Yiguchen had practiced it so well. If it was an ordinary Qi refining realm sword cultivator, they might not have such a level of swordsmanship cultivation. Even Situ Hongxue and Murong Ditian were slightly surprised. They looked over slightly. That swordsmanship is... Situ Ling's mind flashed. She felt that she had seen it somewhere before. Murong Ming's eyes were also filled with doubt. Golden Lion Saber Art, Mad Lion Slash. Zhao Fengyang looked at the strange gazes around him. He was even more embarrassed and angry. The genuine Qi in his body exploded, and his cultivation of the 7th cycle of Qi refining realm completely exploded. The intense saber light was like the sun, and there was a faint sound of a lion's roar. This move caused the surrounding cultivators to fall silent. The power of this saber was very strong. Yiguchen snorted coldly. His Vajra celestial body was operating at full strength. At the same time, he ignited his chi and blood. The strength of dragon and elephant flowed in his meridians and then exploded. It rose on the surface of Yiguchen's body, forming the shape of a dragon and elephant. Vacuum sword wave, stacking waves. With one move, the space shook. The void sword wave was like a huge wave, sweeping in all directions. This is. Some people were shocked, including Lu Tianying, Situ Ling, and Murong Ming. Chapter 60. When Yiguchen used the vacuum sword wave, Murong Ming and Situ Ling were shocked. They vaguely thought of someone. Especially Murong Ming, he had seen someone use this sword technique with his own eyes. Lu Tianying's eyes were also filled with shock. However, he was not shocked by Yiguchen's identity, but by the vacuum sword wave that he had displayed. This is the upper spiritual sword technique of the Limitless Sword Sect, the Void Sword technique. How could this brat learn it? Even I haven't learned this sword technique. Lu Tianying was shocked. The Void Sword technique was a upper spiritual sword technique. It was considered a core sword technique in the Limitless Sword Sect. Even he was not qualified to learn it. However, he had seen Xian Hao use this sword technique before, so he recognized it at a glance. Rumble. Yiguchen's 20 layers of transparent sword wave overlapped and collided with Zhao Fengyang's blade radiance. A blinding light burst out and shook the entire sky sword peak. Yiguchen and Zhao Fengyang were at the center of the impact, so they had to bear the brunt of the shockwave. Yiguchen's face was slightly flushed as he retreated dozens of steps. The golden light on his body flickered. It was the King Kong celestial body that was resisting the shockwave. Zhao Fengyang also retreated dozens of steps. Although it was not a big deal, his blood and vital energy were surging in his chest. After this move, there was still no clear difference in strength. This caused everyone to suck in a deep breath of air. They could tell that Zhao Fengyang had used the strength of a 7th Revolution Qi Refinement Realm cultivator, but he still could not defeat Yiguchen. Fighting against a 7th Revolution Qi Refinement Realm cultivator with a profound origin realm cultivation, at this moment, everyone looked at Yiguchen with a deep shock in their eyes. Monster. A true monster. When did such a monster appear in our Beichin mansion? He's actually able to fight against a disciple on the Heavenly Saber ranking of the Sealed Saber Royal Palace at the Essence Origin stage. Some of the cultivators looked at each other in shock. However, some sword cultivators felt relieved. The people of the Saber-conferred King's Palace had always been domineering, especially the disciples of the Heavenly Saber list. Seeing Zhao Fengyang suffer, many sword cultivators felt delighted. Who are you? Zhao Fengyang's gaze was solemn. He had originally thought that Yiguchen was just a sword cultivator who had some fortuitous encounters. However, this was clearly not the case. Zhao Fengyang knew that even among the younger generation of his sworn enemy, the Sword Sect Tower Forest, there weren't many who had such profound sword skills. Zhao Fengyang's question attracted everyone's attention. Even Situ Hongxue and Murong Ditian were slightly surprised. It's you, Yiguchen. A horrified shriek came from Murong Ming's mouth. As soon as he said this, everyone fell silent. Who was Yiguchen? Some people were puzzled as they had never heard of this name. Lu Tianying and the others were also puzzled. Only Chu Qingqi had a strange glint in his eyes as he looked deeply at Yiguchen. Ah, so it's him. Yiguchen, the leader of the 7 heavenly prides of the Milky Way Prefecture. He even obtained the title of Sword Master. Suddenly, a sword cultivator seemed to have thought of something and shouted. He looked at Yiguchen with a hint of admiration. The title of Sword Master was an unparalleled honor for sword cultivators. What? Yiguchen. So it's him. He's actually the leader of the Milky Way Prefecture's heavenly prides. No wonder I've never heard of him before. He's not from our Beichin mansion. If that's the case, then it makes sense. He's the Milky Way Prefecture's #1 heavenly pride, the former sword master. It would be strange if such a heavenly pride couldn't even defeat Zhao Fengyang. But I've heard that Yiguchen died as a genius. The current leader of the Milky Way Prefecture's heavenly prides seems to be Xia Yubing from the Xia clan. As Yiguchen's name spread, it also attracted a lot of surprise and discussion. After all, the Beichin mansion was not the Milky Way Prefecture. Most of the people here were not familiar with Yiguchen's name, but many sword cultivators remembered him. This young man who had obtained the title of Sword Master had once stunned the entire Saint Origin dynasty and was even ranked 5th on the Saint Origin Heaven Pride ranking. Unfortunately, his genius halo had fallen in the Sword King's secret realm and he was no longer famous. So he was the former Sword Master. Lu Tianying's expression was still calm. The leader of the Milky Way Prefecture's heavenly prides has recovered his cultivation. Murong Ditian also looked at Yiguchen. As the leader of the heavenly prides in the same prefecture, Murong Ditian had naturally paid attention to Yiguchen. However, after Yiguchen disappeared from the crowd, Murong Ditian no longer cared about him. Even now, Murong Ditian still looked at Yiguchen with an indifferent gaze, as if he did not put him in his eyes. If Yiguchen did not have that setback, his current cultivation level would naturally be on par with Murong Ditian. However, Murong Ditian could also see that Yiguchen's cultivation level was really only at the 9th level of the essence realm. Even if his sword skills were amazing, Murong Ditian still did not care. He is the sword master. Situ Hongxue looked at Yiguchen with her beautiful eyes. She, who was obsessed with swordsmanship, naturally knew Yiguchen's name. In the past, after Yiguchen won the title of Sword Master, she had wanted to meet him to discuss swordsmanship. However, she was entangled with many things later on, so she left it at that. After that, the incident in the Sword King's secret realm happened. Situ Hongxue naturally did not have the chance to meet the Sword Master again. Now that his identity had been exposed, Yiguchen smiled and raised his hand to lift the bamboo hat, revealing a handsome face with sharp edges and sword-like eyebrows. I am Yi Gu Chen. The 3 words were sonorous and forceful. It was as if the young man who obtained the title of Sword Master had returned. So what if you are the Sword Master? It is just an empty name. You are just an ant at the 9th level of the essence realm. Zhao Fengyang said coldly. Yiguchen's identity was exposed, but to him, it was still a loss of face. After all, he was a disciple of the Heavenly Saber list. If he was suppressed by the former Sword Master, he would be ridiculed when he returned to the saber-conferred King Palace. Today, you have obstructed my cultivation. Only your blood can quench my anger. Yiguchen was so angry that he laughed. His aura erupted and surged into the sky. Vaguely, the roars of dragons and elephants could be heard. Kill! Yiguchen spat out the word like a powerful army. Although his cultivation level was not as high as Zhao Fengyang's, his aura was not any weaker. Golden Lion Saber Art, Fierce Lion Revolving Slash. Zhao Fengyang also slashed out with his saber. His aura was berserk and his saber light shook the surroundings like thunder. The 9 orifices golden saber slashed out consecutively. Several saber lights swept out and formed a ring. Everywhere it passed, rocks cracked and deep ravines were plowed out. Facing Zhao Fengyang's powerful attack, Yiguchen's eyes were as calm as an ancient well. He activated the 36 sword veins in his body and slashed out at the same time. This sword was like moonlight. It was mesmerizing and beautiful. It was the ultimate move of the piercing moon sword art, Moonfall. When Yiguchen executed this move, Situ Hongshue's eyes narrowed and her rosy lips parted. She was absent-minded for a moment. That sword art. She was stunned. Chapter 61. That sword move was beautiful and enchanting. It looked beautiful, but after Yiguchin's 36 sword veins, its power multiplied. The air was torn apart as if it was made of paper. Only the dreamlike sword light collided with Zhao Fengyang's move. In an instant, the sword light and saber light were chaotic. Gravel shot into the sky and intense true chi ripples swept in all directions, causing many warriors to retreat. Zhao Fengyang and Yiguchin's bodies shook and blood flowed from the corners of their mouths. Kill! However, they did not stop at all. Yiguchin used the Willow Catkin wind movement technique and Zhao Fengyang also used the same movement technique. The two approached each other and the Calamity Dust Sword and 9 Orifices Golden Saber collided, causing an ear-piercing sound of metal clashing. The sword and saber collided, creating intense sparks. True chi burst out and profound chi cleansed. Kid, don't think I can't subdue you. 18 mountain splitting forms, Grey Rock Crush. Zhao Fengyang was truly enraged. His aura surged violently as he unleashed his trump card. The 18 mountain splitting forms were fierce and domineering. When Zhao Fengyang used it, it had the power to split mountains. In the face of Zhao Fengyang's domineering saber technique, Yiguchin used softness to overcome hardness and used the Taiji sword technique. He drew a circle with the tip of his sword. No matter how violent Zhao Fengyang's saber chi was, it was quietly submerged. What? What kind of strange sword technique is this? Zhao Fengyang's expression changed for the first time. He had never heard of such a sword technique. 18 mountain splitting forms, water breaks. Each move of Zhao Fengyang's saber technique was stronger than the previous one. However, what shocked him was that no matter how he used his saber technique, he could not hurt Yiguchin. When the surrounding martial artists saw this, they were all shocked. As expected of the sword sect. In the distance, Chu Qingqi could not help but praise. He had to admit that Yiguchin's swordsmanship was not inferior to those geniuses in the inner yard of the sword sect's pagoda forest, not to mention his cultivation state. Is he really that person? That sword path, and that moon-piercing sword art at the level of great accomplishment. On the other side, Situ Hongxue looked calm on the surface, but her heart was already in chaos. The moonfall that Yiguchin had used just now was so poignant and beautiful that it even stunned Situ Hongxue. Then, she thought of the sword marks on the sword testing stone. It was just an ordinary piercing moon sword technique. Could it be a coincidence? Or, Situ Hongxue stared at Yiguchin with her beautiful eyes, her jade-like hands slightly clenched. However, she didn't know that not far away, Murong Ditian had been looking at her, and his gaze was slightly gloomy. He could feel that Situ Hongxue had been paying attention to Yiguchin. To Murong Ditian, this sort of feeling was absolutely uncomfortable. In the arena, the battle between Zhao Fengyang and Yiguchin had reached its climax, and the corners of their mouths were stained with blood. Damn it, I don't believe that you can withstand all of my blade techniques. 18 mountain splitting forms, violent blades splitting mountains and rivers. Zhao Fengyang roared, and the 9 orifices golden blade in his hand exploded with the strongest power. His weapon meridians extended, and the glaring golden light was as dazzling as the sun. When he slashed out with his blade, it was as if he had slashed out a scorching sun. Even Chu Qingqi and the others' eyes twitched when they saw the intense undulations. Ha! Facing Zhao Fengyang's fierce and domineering blade, Yiguchin smiled faintly. I'll return all of your previous moves to you. Yiguchin's wrist shook, and the Taiji sword art in his hand changed from defense to offense. The Taiji sword art was created by Zhang Sanfeng, one of the top 10 experts in the pugilistic world. Its power was obviously not as strong as Yiguchin's. During this period of training, Yiguchin had also cultivated the Taiji sword art to the minor accomplishment realm. Now, the Taiji sword art could reflect 70% of the power. Boom! The Taiji sword art poured out all the power it had absorbed from the previous moves. The power was so strong that even Yiguchen, who was using the Taiji sword art, split open the web between his thumb and index finger and bled. No, how is this possible? Zhao Fengyang was stunned. He did not expect the power of Yiguchen's sword to be far beyond his expectations. Boom! It was as if a sun had exploded, and a strong storm of true qi shot out in all directions. Even the surrounding sword qi pressure was scattered a little. Pfft! A wretched figure flew out and smashed into the ground. He spat out blood, and cracks appeared on the 9 orifices golden blade as it fell to the side. Dead silence, one could even hear some people's heavy and disorderly breathing. Zhao Fengyang was defeated. On the other side, Yiguchen was also gasping for breath. Blood flowed down his chin from the corner of his mouth, and the web between his thumb and index finger was torn open. However, compared to Zhao Fengyang, who was lying on the ground like a dead dog, he was obviously in a much better state. This is the sword sect, the real sword sect. Some sword cultivators looked at Yiguchen with blazing eyes. As one of the 7 major forces in the Saint Origin dynasty, the saber-conferred monarch palace had always suppressed sword cultivators. Now that they saw a disciple of the Heavenly Blade list defeated by Yiguchen from the sword sect, they helped them vent their anger. At this moment, Chu Qingqi, Lu Tianying, Murong Ditian, Situ Hongxue, and the others were also shocked. Yiguchen walked slowly toward Zhao Fengyang with Jia Chen in his hand. Although he was also injured, Yiguchen's condition was much better than Zhao Fengyang's due to the Vajra celestial body and his strong recovery ability. What do you want? Zhao Fengyang struggled, but he couldn't get up. He could only move backward and his tone was no longer arrogant. Instead, there was a hint of fear in his voice. He never imagined that a sword cultivator at the 9th level of the Origin Essence stage would be able to defeat him so miserably. I have said that I will use your blood to appease my anger. I am a man of my word. Yiguchen's eyes were cold. No, I am a member of the saber-conferred monarch palace and a disciple of the Heavenly Blade list. If you kill me, you will be in endless trouble. I advise you to stop now and I can leave. Zhao Fengyang was really afraid. Although he was arrogant, he no longer had that kind of unyielding attitude when he was faced with death. The saber-conferred monarch palace? It doesn't matter. We will stand on opposite sides in the end. Yiguchen didn't care. He was a sword cultivator. If the saber-conferred monarch palace suppressed sword cultivators, there would naturally be friction between them. Yiguchen didn't want to cause trouble, but he wasn't afraid of it. If he had to blame someone, he could only blame Zhao Fengyang for interrupting his comprehension of the sword Dao. For a swordsman who was obsessed with the sword Dao, this grudge was absolutely irreconcilable. Die! Yiguchen shouted. Jia Chen drew his sword and was about to end Zhao Fengyang's life. Right at that moment, a crimson light that carried a tragic and overbearing aura suddenly fell towards Yiguchen. Yiguchen knitted his brows. If he wanted to kill Zhao Fengyang, he wouldn't be able to avoid this fatal blow. Swish! Yiguchen's eyes were cold as he took a few steps back. Boom! When the crimson light landed in front of Zhao Fengyang, the rubble scattered. When the dust dissipated, a crimson saber was revealed. The saber seemed to be made of blood and the veins on it were like the blood vessels of a human. It carried a bloody aura. This is him. Not far away, Chu Qingqi's face changed drastically when he saw the crimson saber. Do you think an ant like you can kill a disciple of the saber-conferred monarch palace's heavenly blade list? A chilling voice came from the figure that was gradually climbing up. Chapter 62. That figure was a young man in his 20s. He wore a simple black robe. The most eye-catching thing about him was his messy gray hair and the scar that ran across the left side of his face. This scar added a hint of malevolence to his originally delicate and pretty face. Oh no, it's really him. Chu Qingqi's face tightened. When the other sword cultivators saw this figure appear, their eyes widened and they immediately retreated in fear. Most of these cultivators were sword cultivators, so they naturally knew who this scar-faced, gray-haired man was. Blood Saber, Mo Juechen from the Saber-Sealing Monarch Hall. This was a name that silenced all sword cultivators. This was because Mo Juechen was ranked 5th on the Heavenly Saber list. There were even rumors that he was only ranked 5th because he didn't want to compete with the other people on the list. Some even said that if Mo Juechen was serious, he could even compete with the number 1 person on the Heavenly Saber list. However, what frightened the sword cultivators wasn't Mo Juechen's reputation and status, but his hatred for sword cultivators. In the north of Heluo, Mo Juechen had killed 36 Qi Refinement Realm sword cultivators with a single slash. In the bloody battle between the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest and the Saber-Sealing Monarch Hall, Mo Juechen had killed more than 10 disciples from the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest. One had to know that the inner disciples of the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest were all elite sword cultivators with extraordinary cultivation. However, Mo Juechen had killed dozens of them. Li Jingfeng, the genius sword cultivator of the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest, had an arm chopped off by Mo Juechen. Mo Juechen's various achievements made him famous amongst the sword cultivators. It was obvious that such a reputation had come from a bloody place. Mo Juechen, you actually came? Chu Qingqi had always been calm and easygoing, but at this moment, he was frowning with a cold expression. The sword-seeking monument is a gathering place for sword cultivators. How can I not attend this banquet? Mo Juechen slowly raised his hand and habitually touched the scar on his face. Senior brother Mo, you're here. Save me. Zhao Fengyang was delighted to see Mo Juechen. It was as though he had grasped onto a life-saving straw. The surprise he was talking about was naturally Mo Juechen's arrival. Trash. Mo Juechen snorted coldly as he glared at Yi Guchen. You are the sword cultivator who obtained the title of Sword Master? So what? Are you going to protect him? Although Yi Guchen didn't know how powerful Mo Juechen was, he could tell from the reactions of the sword cultivators and Chu Qingqi's expression that Mo Juechen wasn't a kind person. Let me think about how you'll die. How about you be hacked to death by my Zong sword? Mo Juechen took one step at a time. With every step he took, his aura grew stronger. This 9 Refinement Qi Refinement Stage. The surrounding sword cultivators were all shocked. Mo Juechen's cultivation was still at the peak of the Qi refining stage. Just his vigorous Qi alone was enough to crush an ordinary Qi refining stage cultivator. Mo Juechen raised his blood-red blade, which glowed with a bloody light. Do you know why I call this saber Zhangjian? Mo Juechen's finger slowly brushed across the blade. Yi Guchen stared at him coldly. It's because it's stained with the blood of sword cultivators. Too much blood. That's why it's called Zhangjian. Mo Juechen slashed out with his saber. The saber qi, which was like a blood-red crescent moon, rushed toward Yi Guchen. Yi Guchen's expression was stern. He knew that Mo Juechen wasn't someone like Zhao Fengyang could compare to. The tribulation dust sword was in front of him. The tip of the sword drew a circle as the Taiji sword technique was executed once again. However, when the saber qi landed, Yi Guchen groaned. His rapidly healing perlicue split open again, and blood flowed out. Although Yi Guchen's physical body was strong and he had the Vajra body, he had already fought a bloody battle with Zhao Fengyang. Now that Mo Juechen, who was even stronger than Zhao Fengyang, was here, he was naturally at a disadvantage. You're going too far. Chu Qingqi's eyes glowed with a green light. He used his fingers as a sword, and green sword qi surged from his body. He was about to help. Heh! Chu Qingqi, this is between them. Why do you have to interfere? At this moment, a beam of qi shot over and scattered Chu Qingqi's sword qi. The person who attacked was Lu Tianying. Although Yi Guqin's identity had been exposed, Lu Tianying wouldn't forget that Yi Guqin had helped little fatty. Moreover, Lu Tianying also wanted to punish Yi Guqin for the origin of the void sword technique. Just now, Yi Guqin's strength had truly shocked Lu Tianying. Now that Mo Juechen had taken action, he was naturally happy to be at ease. How could he possibly watch Chu Qingqi destroy his plan? Limitless Sword Sect. Very well. Chu Qingqi was slightly angry. The reason why he wanted to help Yi Guqin wasn't only because of their small interaction in Desolation City, but also because of Yi Guqin's identity as a sword master. This Mo Juechen is going too far. On the other side, Situ Hongxue frowned slightly. She wasn't sure if Yi Guqin was the one who had held back on the sword testing stone. However, just Mo Juechen's actions were already contemptible. After all, Yi Guqin had just fought with Xiao Fengyang. Hongxue, what does their matter have to do with us? On the other side, Murong Ditian's heart sank when he saw Situ Hongxue's expression. He had never seen Situ Hongxue in such a state before. He couldn't help but dislike Yi Guqin even more. All the sword cultivators in the field held their breaths as they waited. On one side was the sword master Yi Guqin, who had just shown his talent, and on the other side was the infamous blood saber Mo Juechen. This was destined to be a shocking battle. Yi Guqin's breathing was calm. Even when facing a powerful opponent like Mo Juechen, who had gone through the 9th refinement stage, he still didn't have the slightest bit of fear. Just his bearing alone made many sword cultivators secretly applaud him. Mo Juechen looked at Yi Guqin, who had a calm expression from start to finish, and frowned slightly. Interesting. Zhang Jian told me that it thirsts for your blood. Mo Juechen's tone was as cold as ice as he raised his saber and attacked once again. He leaped into the air, and a blood-colored saber light extended out like wings. Blood Wing Saber Technique. Horizontal Lightning Sword, Shocking Thunder. Yi Guqin's sword struck out, and a glaring spiritual pattern exploded on the tribulation dust. It was the Violent Thunder spiritual pattern. One had to know that during the battle with Xiao Fengyang, Yi Guqin didn't even activate the power of the spiritual pattern. Now, it was obvious that Yi Guqin couldn't hold back anymore. The power of the Violent Thunder spiritual pattern was activated, and in an instant, the entire tribulation dust sword burst out with lightning, like a silver snake coiling around the entire sword. In addition, Yi Guqin's horizontal lightning sword had the lightning attribute, causing the power of this sword to be even stronger. Everyone felt that Yi Guqin was like the ruler of lightning. With a single strike, he attracted wind and thunder. Rumble. Intense sword qi and saber light shot out in all directions like the wrath of the heavens. The mountain rocks shattered, and huge cracks appeared on many rock walls. At the center of this collision, a figure spat out a mouthful of blood and flew backwards. It was Yi Guqin. On the other side, Mo Juechen also took a few steps back. He didn't seem to be injured, but the hand holding the saber was charred black. Obviously, that was the power of the Violent Thunder spiritual pattern. Spiritual weapon. Mo Juechen looked at Yi Guqin's sword. His Zhang sword was also a spiritual weapon, but it was a low-grade one. There was only one spiritual pattern carved on it. However, from the collision just now, Mo Juechen could clearly feel that the quality of Yi Guqin's spiritual weapon was better than his Zhang sword. It was at least a middle-grade one. Cough. Yi Guqin clutched his chest and coughed out another mouthful of blood. Ha, Yi Guqin, didn't you want to kill me? Didn't you want to use my blood to quell your anger? Now, who's the one who's going to die? Not far away, Xiao Fengyang laughed very proudly and carefreely. Yi Guqin frowned, and his eyes were like sword beams that could split the sky. If I want to kill you today, even the heavens won't be able to save you. Chapter 63. Yi Guqin shouted angrily, as if he was a god. His entire body was brimming with blood as he used the power of the dragon and elephant. He charged towards Xiao Fengyang like a gust of wind. Do you think you can kill him in front of me? Mo Juechen's vital energy surged in all directions as his gray hair danced in the wind. 7 tyrant blades, wave slash. Mo Juechen slashed with his blood blade and a wave of blade energy surged out. Just the impact alone was enough to break the bones of a normal Qi cultivation realm martial artist. Yi Guqin's eyes were sharp as he burned all the vital energy in his body. A powerful fire engulfed Yi Guqin's body, making him look like a god of war. Vacuum sword wave, overlapping waves. 20 layers of transparent sword waves spread out and stacked together before colliding with Mo Juechen's blade energy. Boom! However, this time, the blade energy broke through the sword wave and charged towards Yi Guqin. Ha, Yi Guqin, how are you going to kill me? Xiao Fengyang's lips were still stained with blood, but he sneered. If Yi Guqin continued to attack, he would be the first to die. Oh, is that so? Yi Guqin's lips curled into a cold smile. Luo Tian protection. Yi Guqin's body trembled as a powerful essence energy flowed through his body. Then, it rushed out of his body and formed the image of a guardian. At the same time, Yi Guqin took out a bamboo spiritual weapon. It was the thunderfire needle that he had taken from Bei Ling. Among the many hidden weapons refined by the Bei clan, aside from the heavenly fire thunderbolt and other hidden weapons, the thunderbolt thunderfire needle was the most powerful. It posed a great threat to even Qi refinement realm masters. If Xiao Fengyang was at his peak, he might have been able to defend himself against the thunderfire needle. However, Xiao Fengyang was also heavily injured. Furthermore, Yi Guqin had suddenly taken out this item. There was no time for him to react. Yi Guqin gathered his essence energy in his palm and slammed it against the bamboo tube. Rumble. A thunderous explosion resounded, and a ball of dense ox hair needles flew towards Xiao Fengyang like a bolt of lightning. No. Xiao Fengyang's face was filled with terror. He had no chance to react at all. Puchi, those needles carried the power of thunder and lightning as they pierced through Xiao Fengyang's body. Accompanied by a blood-curdling scream, Xiao Fengyang's body crashed to the ground. His eyes were wide open as he died with everlasting regret. At the moment of Xiao Fengyang's death, the aftermath of the violent blade energy slammed into Yi Guqin's body. The sharp and powerful blade energy tore apart Yi Guqin's protection of all heaven. This wasn't because the all-heaven protection wasn't strong, but because Yi Guqin hadn't cultivated it for long. Coupled with the limitations of his cultivation, he was unable to bring out the true might of the all-heaven protection. Even so, it was a barrier that weakened the power of the blade energy. The remaining blade energy slammed into Yi Guqin. A golden glow appeared on the surface of Yi Guqin's body, and he was forced back dozens of steps. His bones cracked, and he spat out blood again. However, at this moment, everyone's attention was on the dead Xiao Fengyang. He really killed him. One of the onlooking sword cultivators swallowed hard. He killed a disciple of the Heavenly Blade list in front of Blood Blade Mo Juechen. Some people looked at each other and saw the shock in each other's eyes. Xiao Fengyang was a disciple of the Heavenly Blade list, not a nobody. Although Yi Guqin was from the Sword sect, he hadn't joined the 7 superpowers yet. He had killed Xiao Fengyang, a disciple of the Heavenly Blade list, in front of Mo Juechen. If news of this battle spread, Yi Guqin's reputation would soar. He would rise again like the sun. However, Yi Guqin had to survive this crisis first. Even Mo Juechen's expression froze. He hadn't expected Yi Guqin to use such a method to kill Xiao Fengyang. Furthermore, he had done it in front of him. After all, Mo Juechen had protected Xiao Fengyang, but Xiao Fengyang had died in front of him. Although Mo Juechen didn't really care about Xiao Fengyang, this was a huge stain on his reputation. In an instant, the surrounding air seemed to have frozen, and the temperature dropped. It was killing intent. An extremely strong killing intent. The surrounding martial artists' expressions changed. Just this killing intent alone made them feel as if they had fallen into an ice cave. A chill ran up their spines. Yiguchen, who was targeted by the killing intent, was under the greatest pressure. At this moment, his body wasn't in a good condition. Although he had a perverted physical body, he couldn't withstand fighting someone of a higher cultivation level than him. It could be said that Yiguchen was a monster in the eyes of the crowd for being able to kill Zhao Fengyang. It would be abnormal if he could fight against Mo Juechen. In fact, in the eyes of the crowd, it was hard to say if this sword master could survive Mo Juechen's attack. "You must die." Mo Juechen didn't say anything else. He held the Zong sword in his hand, and a murderous aura exploded. 7 tyrant blades, sun annihilation. Mo Juechen used all his strength to activate the Zong sword. The blood blade emitted a bloodthirsty light, and weapon meridians spread out like blood vessels. With the support of the weapon meridians, Mo Juechen's attack was even more powerful. Everyone focused their eyes. If it were Chu Qingqi, Lu Tianying, or the rest, it wouldn't be easy for them to block this attack. The crimson saber seemed to have turned into a crimson sun as it slammed down on Yiguchen. Yiguchen was facing death, but he wasn't afraid. The tribulation dust in his hand exploded with the greatest power. The 42 weapon meridians exploded, and the broken edge spiritual inscriptions and the explosive thunder spiritual inscriptions were activated at the same time. This was the strongest form of the tribulation dust. The tribulation dust at this moment had truly unleashed the full power of its spiritual inscriptions. Oh my God, 2 spiritual inscriptions. It's a middle-grade spiritual inscriptions weapon. The sword sect actually has such a powerful weapon. The tribulation dust's great power in its peak form made all the spectators cry out in surprise. Even in the 7 great forces, only the core disciples of the sword sect could possess such a weapon. Aurora quick sword, Aurora's passing. It was the brightest divine light in the world at this moment. Boom! As if the gods of the 9 heavens were furious, a violent wave spread out. With the intersection of the 2 as the center, the surrounding cultivators were all pushed back by this powerful wave. Even Chu Qingqi, Lu Tianying, Murong Ditian, Situ Hongxue, and the rest were pushed back. As the dust dispersed, Yiguchen spat out blood again. However, after retreating a few dozen steps, he attacked again. 7 tyrant blades, earth-splitting. Amidst the hazy smoke and dust, a blood-red light suddenly appeared. That was Mo Juechen. He brandished his saber again and clashed with Yiguchen. This can actually contend with Mo Juechen. After experiencing a series of shocks, the surrounding martial warriors were already speechless. The sword sect, which had been silent for a long time, had brought them too much shock and astonishment. As expected of the sword sect, Chu Qingqi sighed and immediately made up his mind. If Yiguchen was really in danger, he would definitely step in even if Lu Tianying stopped him. Chapter 64. Bam! The 2 exchanged blows again. Yiguchen retreated again, and even his sword hand was a little unstable. It wasn't that Yiguchen's sword skills weren't good enough, but that the burden on his body had reached its peak. Perhaps a perfect body could withstand such destruction, but Yiguchen's body had only passed the 2nd minor tribulation, and had yet to reach the level of a perfect body. Although he had extremely vigorous blood qi and recovery ability, the heavily injured Yiguchen couldn't hold on much longer. Do you have any last words? Mo Juechen could see that Yiguchen was already at the end of his rope, and was afraid that it would be difficult for him to take another blow. Who knows the outcome before the end? Yiguchen wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth and smiled coldly. Sigh. The surrounding sword cultivators all sighed. If Yiguchen was at his peak, he might be able to fight against Mo Juechen. Die. Mo Juechen didn't continue fighting. He poured his true qi into his blood saber, and the blood saber's blade was cleansed with blood-like ripples. He waved his saber twice in an instant, forming a cross that tore through the air and shattered the mountain rocks. Blood Fiend Cross Slash. Chu Qingqi's pupils shrank. This was one of Mo Juechen's killing moves, and it had once killed more than 10 Qi refinement sword cultivators. Stop! Chu Qingqi didn't hesitate any longer, and the blue sword Qi of Heaven's End exploded. However, Lu Tianying blocked it with his sword. Get lost! Chu Qingqi was no longer elegant, and his eyes were sharp. This brat once used my limitless sword sex void sword art. Let Mo Juechen finish him off. Lu Tianying said coldly, and pestered Chu Qingqi. On the other side, Situ Hongxue bit her lip and was about to attack, but her shoulder was suddenly pressed down by a strong hand. It was Murong Ditian. Hongxue, Yi Guchen is bound to die, and there's nothing we can do. Let's not get involved, climbing the sword-seeking steel is more important. Murong Ditian said indifferently. Just as Yi Guchen was about to die, the little fatty's figure appeared on a mountain not far away. Hey! It's that big brother. Little Fatty was shocked. Seeing that Yi Guchen was in danger, he was about to use the divine movement secret technique's ground shrink. However, in the next moment, little Fatty stopped in his tracks and looked at Yi Guchen in bewilderment. This is, the Universal Sword Codex. Mo Juechen's move was almost invincible. At this moment of life and death, Yi Guchen could even clearly see the terrifying cross-shaped saber qi, which seemed to be able to pierce through gold and shatter stone, heading straight for him. However, he didn't use any of his trump cards, such as the spirit-devouring mystic art or the little Ashura sword formation. He didn't even use the defensive hairpin that the female sword cultivator had left behind. Instead, he closed his eyes. Ah! Being on the brink of death, I haven't felt this way for a long time. What Yi Guchen needed was to experience this moment of life and death. At that moment, he activated the Universal Sword Codex in his body and the sword meridians appeared clearly. 18, 36, 72, 108. It didn't stop there. 109th sword meridians appeared again. At that moment, Yi Guchen was immersed in the feeling of the sword qi. He had already felt it before, but he had been interrupted by Zhao Fengyang. At this moment of life and death, Yi Guchen's heart was as clear as a mirror. He got rid of all distracting thoughts and only the sword was left in his mind. Vaguely, he seemed to resonate with the sword-seeking steel. In the depths of his spiritual sense, a figure seemed to appear. It was a figure that wasn't very tall, but stood proudly like a pillar that supported the heavens. The figure suddenly stretched out a hand and pointed to the sky. Qian, then, he pointed to the ground. Kuan, heaven as Qian, earth as Kuan. Qian Kuan as one, unparalleled holy sword. The figure suddenly clasped his hands together as if he was trying to merge the heavens and earth into one. He used his fingers as a sword, and in an instant, an extremely dazzling golden sword energy tore through the 9 heavens like the light of the night and tore through the earth for thousands of miles. It was as though there was only one person left in the entire world. This sword move. Qian Kuan, one holy sword. Rumble. In a flash, Yi Guchen suddenly opened his eyes. The surface of his body was crystal clear, and the sword veins were rapidly opening. 130 sword veins. 160 sword veins. In the end, Yi Guchen made another breakthrough in the universal sword cannon with the help of the sword qi here. He had a total of 270 sword veins. The moment he opened his eyes, the blood-evil cross-cut was already close to him. Yi Guchen slowly raised Jiechen. At this moment, his eyes weren't pitch black. Instead, they were surging with a bright golden radiance, like the eyes of a golden dragon. Jie Chen's sword pointed to the sky. Qian, he pointed to the ground with one finger. Kuan, then, heaven and earth became one. The endless sword pressure emitted by the sword-seeking steel boiled. Qian Kun as one, unparalleled holy sword. A golden sword radiance lit up the area. Together with Jia Chen and the 270 sword veins, the power of this sword move was shocking. Boom! Under the shocked gazes of the crowd, the golden sword light tore through the blood-fiend cross-slash as easily as crushing dry weeds, and then swept violently towards Mo Ju Chen. This move wasn't made by Yi Guchen himself. Instead, it was made by resonating with the sword-seeking steel and using the endless sword pressure of the sword-seeking steel. In other words, Yi Guchen was just a catalyst. The endless sword pressure of the sword-seeking steel was the real torrent. Therefore, the power of this move was far beyond what a Qi cultivation realm cultivator could withstand. At this moment, Mo Juechen's expression changed. He was no longer as calm as before. He couldn't imagine how Yi Guchen had managed to trigger the sword pressure of the sword-seeking steel. This move was not something he could withstand. Blood Saber Sword Burial. Mo Juechen roared and activated his qi. At the same time, he coughed out a mouthful of blood essence onto the blood saber. A spiritual pattern appeared on the blood saber. It was the bloodthirsty spiritual pattern. It could make use of Mo Juechen's blood essence to unleash an even greater power. With this move, Mo Juechen had cut off the arm of Li Jingfeng, the genius sword cultivator of the sword sect. However, this move was still broken. Mo Juechen's origin ring flashed and a blood-red shield appeared. It was a top-grade defensive spiritual weapon. This blood shield was a defensive spiritual artifact that his master had passed down to him. With Mo Juechen's cultivation, he had never used it before. However, now that he was forced into a corner, he had no choice but to take out his life-saving trump card. The golden sword light landed on the blood shield and was slightly delayed. Before Mo Juechen could rejoice, he heard a series of cracking sounds coming from the blood shield, and then, the shield was broken. Ah! A miserable cry rang out from Mo Juechen's mouth. The golden sword light flashed past, and his entire left arm was chopped off from the shoulder. Shock, astonishment, stupefaction, disbelief. At this moment, all the spectators, including Chu Qingqi, Lu Tianying, Situ Hongxue, and even the arrogant Murong Ditian, had frozen expressions. Because this sword strike was too shocking. Chapter 65. Yi Guchen from the sword sect, I, Mo Juechen, will remember this. I will repay the debt of losing an arm with my life in the future. Mo Juechen's figure retreated rapidly. He covered the wound on his arm with his hand and roared in a hoarse voice. Since Yi Guchen was able to trigger the sword pressure from the sword-seeking steel, how could Mo Juechen stay at the Sky Sword Peak to fight with him? That would be courting death. Seeing that Mo Juechen had retreated quickly after saying those words, the warriors were speechless. The broken arm on the ground was still bleeding. Some sword practitioners even pinched their faces, feeling that it was unreal. Just now, Yi Guchen was about to die and was about to be killed by Mo Juechen. However, in the blink of an eye, the situation had taken a 360-degree turn. However, the destructive golden sword light was deeply imprinted in their minds. Is this, the so-called sword sect? A sword practitioner murmured. Then, he looked at Yi Guchen with endless fanaticism in his eyes. Cutting off blood saber Mo Juechen's arm with one sword was an amazing achievement. Chu Qingqi and the others were also shocked by Yi Guchen's sword. Even Yi Guchen himself had a vague impression of that sword when he recalled it. Although he had displayed that sword move, it did not mean that he had mastered the sacred sword of heaven and earth. It was just a move that resonated with the sword chi of the sword-seeking steel and was naturally displayed. In other words, if Yi Guchen were to display it again, he would not be able to display that amazing move again. However, at least Yi Guchen felt that the sword pressure here was no longer pressuring him. He turned to look at Lu Tianying. When Yiguchen's gaze landed on Lu Tianying, his expression changed. It was a little cold, but also a little suffocating. Geniuses like them knew that Yiguchen did not use his own strength to launch the sword attack. Instead, he used some unknown method to trigger the pressure of the sword qi in this place. However, under the sword-seeking steel of Tianjian Peak, it was hard to guarantee that Yiguchen would be able to activate the sword qi and perform that terrifying sword move again. Originally, Lu Tianying had come here to win a place on the swordsmanship-seeking steel. However, when he saw Yiguchen's gradually cold eyes, Lu Tianying's face turned ugly. No matter how unwilling he was, he could only snort and leave. Seeing Lu Tianying leave, Yiguchen's gaze swept past and landed on the peerless fairy, Situ Hongxue. What surprised Yiguchen was that although he did not know Situ Hongxue seemed to pay a lot of attention to him. At this moment, Situ Hongshue's eyes were filled with doubt, hesitation, and curiosity. Yiguchen shifted his gaze away once again. When he saw Murong Ditian's slightly cold and fearful expression, Yiguchen was stunned. He didn't know when he had offended the #1 prodigy of the Beichen mansion. However, when he thought of Situ Hongxue, he immediately understood. However, Yiguchen was not someone who would casually look for trouble. He did not have any interactions with Murong Ditian. If Murong Ditian did not provoke him, he did not need to pay attention to him. Moreover, the more important reason was that Yiguchen's body condition was already extremely bad. If it was not for his strong recovery ability, he would have already fallen to the ground. Borrowing the remaining power of that sword move, I will directly ascend the swordsmanship-seeking steel. Yiguchen no longer hesitated and rushed towards the swordsmanship-seeking steel. With the power of that sword move, no one dared to obstruct Yiguchen's path. It was not until Yiguchen's figure was far away that the crowd came back to their senses. While exclaiming in surprise and admiration, they also followed closely behind. The swordsmanship-seeking steel was located at the top of the Sky Sword Peak. Not long after, Yiguchen arrived at the bottom of the swordsmanship-seeking steel. Looking at it, the swordsmanship-seeking steel was simple and vigorous. It stood tall with a dignified and vicissitude feeling. On the swordsmanship-seeking steel, there were only a few names carved on it. Although the swordsmanship-seeking steel would erupt with magnificent sword qi every year, there were only a few people who could withstand the pressure of the sword qi and climb up. As for those who were qualified to leave their names on the swordsmanship-seeking steel, there were naturally even fewer. It did not mean that the higher one's cultivation level, the higher one's name could be left on the swordsmanship-seeking steel. Those who could leave their names on the steel all had their own unique comprehension of the way of the sword or were extremely talented. If one did not understand the way of the sword, no matter how powerful one would not be able to leave their names on the swordsmanship-seeking steel. Just like Zhao Fengyang, Mo Juechen and the others, they did not come here for the swordsmanship-seeking steel, but only to obstruct Chu Qingqi and the others. However, for sword cultivators, the swordsmanship-seeking steel was extremely important. Those who could leave their names on the swordsmanship-seeking steel were all people who would have great achievements on the way of the sword in the future. Yiguchen glanced at the swordsmanship-seeking steel and could not help but be secretly speechless. Although there were not many people who had left their names on the swordsmanship-seeking steel, the sword marks they left each had their own merits. Among them, Yiguchen also saw some names. Xian Hao, the one from the Limitless Sword sect. Yiguchen pondered. He had also heard of Xian Hao's name. Xian Hao was the true genius of the Limitless Sword sect. It was rumored that he had already cultivated the sect's most precious sword art, the Limitless Sword art, to the initial level. The Limitless Sword art was a top-class spiritual sword art. It was extremely difficult to cultivate it to the initial level. However, Xian Hao had done it. In addition, Yiguchen also saw a name, Yan Wushuang. The name carved on the sword edge had both the sharpness of a man and the delicacy of a woman. This name left an impression on Yiguchen. In addition, there was another name with a dark and desolate taste. Yuan Mia, the second on the Saint Yuan genius list, Yi Guqin muttered to himself. It was said that Yuan Mia was a member of the royal family of the Saint Yuan dynasty. Although he had a rough life, his unpredictable sword art was well known throughout the dynasty. The entire swordsmanship-seeking steel was 10 meters long from top to bottom. The names Xian Hao, Yuan Mia, Yan Wushuang, and other names were at the top. Above Xian Hao and Yan Wushuang, there was another name that stood above all the genius sword cultivators like the moon surrounded by stars. Yi Guqin looked at it. Jun Xiaoyao. It's him. Almost no one has seen him before. The rumored first on the Saint Yuan genius list, Yi Guqin thought to himself. Jun Xiaoyao, the first on the Saint Yuan genius list, called young Master Xiaoyao. No one knew who he was. No one knew his background or identity. Some even said that Jun Xiaoyao was not from the Saint Yuan dynasty. Interesting. The path of sword art is only interesting when there are opponents. Yi Guqin didn't feel the slightest pressure when he saw the names of the sword cultivators. Instead, he laughed heartily. He looked around the swordsmanship-seeking steel and saw 5 perfectly round stones that looked like chess pieces. Are those the so-called 5 spots? Yi Guqin no longer hesitated and sat cross-legged on one of the stones. When Yi Guqin sat down, the ground around the stones suddenly lit up with formation runes. A semi-transparent light shield enveloped Yi Guqin's body, protecting him. In an instant, Yi Guqin felt that his eyes and ears had become sharper. Even the tactile sensation of a breeze brushing past his ears had become extremely sharp. At this moment, Yi Guqin's heart seemed to have turned into a mirror that reflected the world. Could this be the Enlightenment Stone? Yi Guqin's eyes lit up with surprise. He had heard that there were some miraculous items in this world, such as the Enlightenment Stone and the Awakening Leaf, that could help one achieve enlightenment in cultivation. Of course, such miraculous items were extremely difficult to find. Without a certain amount of luck, it was almost impossible to come across one. However, Yi Guqin had encountered one. Luck. It was a great luck. With Yi Guqin's perception as the Sword Demon and the Enlightenment Stone, he was confident that he could take another big step forward in his path of sword art. Yi Guqin didn't delay any longer. He casually took out some precious medicine and consumed it. After recovering from his injuries, he closed his eyes and entered a state of enlightenment. Chapter 66. After Yi Guqin, there were also a few figures that climbed up. Surprisingly, after Yi Guqin, the second person to climb up the sword-seeking steel wasn't Murong Ditian, but the little fatty. The little fatty immediately saw Yi Guqin. Why does he have the Myriad Sword Codex? Could it be that he is the same as Martial Uncle and is from that clan? However, why would that clan appear in the South Horizon region? The little fatty couldn't understand. However, seeing that Yi Guqin was comprehending, he didn't disturb him. Instead, he stared at those Tao comprehension stones with saliva dripping from the corner of his mouth. These are Tao comprehension stones. I wonder if they taste good. The little fatty ran to the side of a Tao comprehension stone and opened his mouth, revealing his snow-white teeth as he took a bite. Fuck, so hard. The little fatty covered his mouth. That mysterious silver heavy water and meteorite iron are still alright. However, these Tao comprehension stones are like old steamed buns that have been placed there for thousands of years. The little fatty was helpless as he gave up on the idea of eating the Tao comprehension stone and sat on it instead. Fortunately, Yi Guqin was currently comprehending with his eyes closed. Otherwise, he would definitely be extremely shocked if he saw the little fatty's abnormal actions. After the little fatty, the third figure walked over with a majestic gait. It was Murong Ditian. His gaze swept past Yi Guqin and the little fatty with a cold expression. He had his own pride. Originally, he wanted to be the first to climb up and obtain a spot. However, he didn't expect that all the light would be snatched away by the sword sect's Yiguchen. Especially when Situ Hongxue paid attention to Yiguchen, it made Murong Ditian feel extremely uncomfortable. However, with the protection of the light barrier, Murong Ditian couldn't do anything to Yiguchen. Furthermore, he was also extremely fearful of the golden sword light that Yiguchen executed. At least before leaving the sword seeking steel, Murong Ditian wouldn't be so foolish as to casually provoke Yiguchen. Leaving my name on the sword seeking steel is the most important. Everything else is just empty talk. Murong Ditian didn't hesitate any longer and also sat on a Dao comprehension stone. Then came Situ Hongxue and Chu Qingqi. Situ Hongxue looked deeply at Yiguchen with her beautiful eyes, then sat down cross-legged on an enlightenment stone. Chu Qingqi did the same. At that moment, the 5 spots on the sword seeking steel had been decided. Next, it would depend on who could use the Dao comprehension stone to comprehend sword techniques and leave their names on the sword seeking steel. Of course, in addition to Yiguchen and the other 4, there were still some warriors who had climbed to the top. Although they were not qualified to compete for places, sitting cross-legged near the swordsmanship-seeking steel was also a kind of cultivation. Not long after, the entire Sky Sword Peak was occupied by numerous cultivators. Of course, compared to the cultivators who climbed the Sky Sword Peak, these cultivators were just a drop in the ocean. Murong Ming and Situ Ling had also reached the peak. Although they were geniuses from super-aristocratic families, they were obviously inferior to Murong Ditian and Situ Hongxue. After Yiguchen's shocking sword, Murong Ming didn't even dare to breathe loudly, let alone provoke Yiguchen. He only hoped that his brother could suppress Yiguchen. As for Situ Ling, she was more and more interested in Yiguchen. Although the other warriors, including Murong Ming and Situ Ling, had lost their qualifications, they still wanted to see if Yiguchen, who had shocked them countless times, would shock them again. Or was the previous sword just a coincidence? After all, if they wanted to prove that Yiguchen was really a sword Dao grandmaster, they still had to see if he could leave his name on the sword seeking steel. Everyone was very curious whether this sword sect, which had been silent for a long time, would rise again and shock the entire Saint Origin dynasty. At this moment, Yiguchen was isolated by the light barrier and fell into absolute silence. At the same time, with the support of the Dao Comprehension Stone, Yiguchen felt as if he had merged with the heaven and earth. In his mind, a figure appeared. It was himself, practicing the most basic piercing moon sword art. Then, another figure appeared, performing the boundless heaven sword art. After that, the vacuum sword wave, aurora fast sword, taiji sword art, linear lightning sword, and so on all appeared in his mind. Yiguchen was watching his own sword art from the perspective of a bystander. This kind of comprehension was very novel. As the saying goes, the onlooker sees more clearly than the onlooker. Yiguchen might be able to see the flaws in other people's sword art, but he might not be able to see through his own sword art. This was the case even for the sword demon in his previous life. Perfect sword art was Yiguchen's highest pursuit. Now, Yiguchen was comprehending his own sword art from the perspective of a bystander. He had gained a lot. While Yiguchen was meditating, the other 4 people also had their own meditations, but the methods they used were different. For example, Little Fatty, in his visualization, there was only a sword floating in the chaotic fog. Chu Qingqi, on the other hand, seemed to have transformed into a rock, flying above the 9th heaven. But one thing was certain, including Yiguchen, all 5 of them had gained something of their own. Finally, after a day, one of them finally opened his eyes. It was Little Fatty. There seemed to be a trace of confusion in his eyes, as if he had just woken up. Who is that guy? Some people did not know who Little Fatty was. I don't know, although I don't know his identity, he angered Master Gu, Lu Tianying, and the others at the Heavenly Saint Chamber of Commerce's auction. Little Fatty was the first to come to his senses, but he looked at the sword seeking steel and did not intend to leave his name on it. Is he not going to make a move? Some people were puzzled. After little Fatty got up, his enlightenment stone directly disappeared in the formation. Little Fatty did not mind. He glanced at Yiguchin and murmured, "I have a feeling, brother, we will meet again." After muttering to himself, the little Fatty patted his butt and left under the stunned gazes of the crowd. "Damn it, isn't this a waste of a spot?" Many warriors wailed. They wanted to leave their names on the sword seeking steel but did not have the chance, but little Fatty left directly without a care. Maybe he knows that he doesn't have the ability to leave his name. Some warriors guessed. Everyone nodded inwardly to comfort themselves. After another day, Situ Hongxue, who was dressed in a snow-white robe, suddenly opened her beautiful eyes. Then, she slowly got up. The primordial ring flashed between her slender fingers, and the divine spiritual weapon, Wang Ningmei, fell into her jade-like hand. Seeing Situ Hongxue stand up, many warriors and sword cultivators became alert. Situ Hongshue's eyes widened, looking forward to Situ Hongshue's performance. But in truth, compared to Murong Ditian, Chu Qingqi, and the other heaven prides, Situ Hongxue was more famous for her beauty. Although Situ Hongxue was ranked 7th on the heaven prides list and possessed extraordinary strength, her beauty naturally covered up her cultivation base and strength. This was also why Situ Hongxue was so determined. If it was before, Situ Hongxue might not have been sure if she could leave her name on the sword-seeking steel. However, after the sword-testing stone's guidance, Situ Hongshue's understanding of her own sword skills had improved tremendously. Coupled with the enlightenment she had gained from the enlightenment stone, Situ Hongxue was filled with confidence. Chapter 67. When the beauty attacked, everyone watched carefully. Regardless of whether they could leave their names on the sword-seeking steel or not, just watching her sword dance was a kind of enjoyment. Situ Hongxue clenched her fists tightly. Her sword was graceful, like a fairy riding the waves. There was a unique charm in her graceful movements. The warriors felt the spring breeze blowing on their faces, intoxicating them. At other times, they felt the autumn maple rustling, and the grass and trees withered. Sometimes it was as blazing as summer, and sometimes it was as cold as winter. Many warriors were surprised. They had only heard of Situ Hongshue's name before, but they did not expect her swordsmanship to be so skillful. Even if she was not as good as those true sword masters, she was still very experienced. How could they know that Situ Hongshue's improvement was so great because of Yiguchin's guidance? At this moment, Situ Hongxue was not distracted by external things. She focused on the 4 seasons swordsmanship. The sword moves that were originally just for show seemed to have come alive at this moment. Sister Hong Shui is so powerful. Situ Ling was stunned. Ha! Situ Hongxue let out a delicate cry. The genuine qi in her body was fully activated. She struck out with her sword toward the sword-seeking steel. As the sword danced, Situ Hongshue's 4 beautiful sword marks appeared on the sword-seeking steel. It was in the middle, and above it were the names of Xian Hao, Yan Wushuang, and the others. After Situ Hongxue left her name on the sword-seeking steel, the sword-seeking steel suddenly burst out with a ray of light, and then a stream of light directly entered between Situ Hongshue's eyebrows. Situ Hongxue closed her eyes to comprehend, and then opened them with joy. Obviously, she had gained a lot. The surrounding warriors were all envious. The reason why the sword-seeking steel was so popular was that someone had once again obtained a king-level swordsmanship. And now, Situ Hongxue had obviously obtained something that satisfied her. After the joy, Situ Hongxue seemed to have thought of something, and her beautiful eyes turned to Yiguchin, who still did not move at all. Was it really him? Situ Hongxue hesitated. Although the trip to the sword-seeking steel was a success for her, she still wanted to know if the person who had left a move on the sword-testing stone was Yiguchin. After Situ Hongxue, Chu Qingqi also opened his eyes and stood up. At this moment, the green sword chi around his body seemed to have materialized. Many cultivators were shocked. They knew of the heaven limit blue skies art in the sword sect's forest of pagodas. It was a true spirit-level cultivation method. At this moment, Chu Qingqi clearly had a deeper understanding of it. Chu Qingqi smiled brightly. Soon after, he used his fingers as a sword. A powerful green sword chi gushed out, as if it wanted to soar into the 9 heavens. With a wave of the sleeves, the winds and clouds rise to the heavens. Chu Qingqi pointed with his sword and a blue sword aura burst out, leaving 3 words on the sword-seeking steel. Chu Qingqi's name was slightly higher than Situ Hongshue's, but he was still some distance away from Xian Hao, Yan Wushuang, and the others. However, this did not mean that Chu Qingqi was not powerful. It was just that Xian Hao and the others were too monstrous. Many cultivators were not surprised that Chu Qingqi could leave his name on the sword-seeking steel. After all, he was an outstanding talent who had been famous for a long time in the inner court of the sword sect's forest of pagodas. After Chu Qingqi left his name, he also received an opportunity from the sword-seeking steel. Next, everyone looked at Murong Ditian and Yi Guchen. Only the 2 of them were left. Everyone was guessing whether or not they would be able to leave their names on the sword quest steel. The majority of the people didn't doubt Murong Ditian. However, they didn't know much about Yi Guchen. They also didn't know if Yi Guchen truly had that kind of ability or if he had used some kind of method. However, everyone was very curious about this kind of competition. One was the number 1 Heaven's Pride of Beichun Prefecture. The other was once the number 1 Heaven's Pride of Milky Way Prefecture. The collision between the number 1 Heaven's Prides of 2 prefectures was very exciting. However, no matter the outcome, after the sword-seeking steel, Yi Guchen's name would definitely spread throughout the entire Beichun Prefecture and even the surrounding prefectures. This Yi Guchen can't be compared to Big Brother. Big Brother will definitely trample him under his feet. Murong Ming thought viciously. Although he did not dare to provoke Yi Guchen now, it did not mean that he did not hate Yi Guchen. Situ Hongxue, Situ Ling, Chu Qingqi, and the others did not leave. Instead, they waited for the result. After another half a day, Murong Ditian, who had been sitting cross-legged, finally moved. He slowly opened his eyes. Along with his awakening, an aura like that of an awakened lion spread out. He slowly stood up, and the true qi in his body surged and spread in all directions. The surrounding people all retreated. At this moment, they looked at Murong Ditian. He was like a monument that stood between heaven and earth, and he carried a domineering aura that could suppress everything. The number 1 Heaven's Pride of Beichun Prefecture lived up to his name. Mysterious Heaven Sword Art, Sword Sweeping 8 Desolation. Murong Ditian's sword fingers swept out, and in an instant, a violent sword aura exploded. A total of 8 sword auras that could split heaven and earth shot out and landed on the sword-seeking steel. Initial stage. It's a spirit-grade sword art at the initial stage. A sword cultivator roared with a hoarse voice. A spirit-grade sword art at the initial stage. Many cultivators took a deep breath. In order to determine whether a Heaven's Pride had the ability, one had to see if he had practiced a spirit-grade sword art to the initial stage. Right now, the sword-sweeping 8 Desolation that Murong Ditian had used was the ultimate move of the mysterious Heaven Sword Art. At this moment, a wisp of deep shock surged into everyone's eyes. Even Situ Hongshue's beautiful eyes surged with a wisp of shock. She knew that her fiancé was extremely talented, but she did not expect him to be so talented. It was too difficult to reach the initial stage of a spirit-grade sword art. It required a great amount of comprehension and strength. Perhaps it would be easier for experts who had broken through the life and death threshold to cultivate a spirit-grade sword art. However, it would be countless times more difficult for qi refinement experts like them. Even with the support of the Tao Comprehension Stone, Situ Hongxue was still one step away from the initial stage of the 4 Seasons sword art. Rumble. 8 vigorous and domineering sword chi landed on the sword-seeking steel with a loud bang. Following the dissipation of the smoke and dust, Murong Ditian's 4 domineering and fierce sword marks were deeply imprinted on the sword-seeking steel. Everyone focused their eyes and looked over. All of them revealed a shocked expression. Murong Ditian's 4 words were only an inch away from Xian Hao, Yan Wushuang, and the rest. Xian Hao, Yan Wushuang, Yuan Mia, and the rest were all publicly acknowledged heaven's pride of the sword Dao in the Saint Origin dynasty. Their talent was extraordinary, and their talent in the sword Dao far exceeded that of ordinary people. Although Murong Ditian was the number 1 heaven's pride of the Beichen Manor and ranked 5th on the Saint Origin heaven's pride ranking, he was still lacking in fame compared to the heaven's pride of the 7 great factions and the royal family. However, the ranking of the sword marks meant that Murong Ditian was not inferior to these heaven's pride of the sword Dao. In fact, if he succeeded in his cultivation in the future, he could even be on par with them. At this moment, even Chu Qingqi's gaze towards Murong Ditian was somewhat serious. Chu Qingqi thought to himself, Murong Ditian's talent in the sword Dao is comparable to senior sister Yan's. Most importantly, Murong Ditian had already been decided to become a disciple of the Limitless Sword sect. In other words, the Limitless Sword sect would have another heaven's pride of the Limitless Sword sect apart from Xian Hao and the rest. If that's the case, the pressure on my sword sect's pagoda forest will be even greater in the Void Sword realm. Chu Qingqi frowned, but for some reason, he turned his gaze towards Yiguchen. If this sword master can join my sword sect's pagoda forest. Chapter 68. Murong Ditian's performance had truly stunned everyone. Originally, the number 1 prodigy of the Beichen mansion already carried enough weight. If this matter was spread out, Murong Ditian's reputation would definitely reach a new level. Beside the sword-seeking steel, the only one who had yet to make a move was Yiguchen. Murong Ditian looked at the sword mark on the sword-seeking steel and frowned slightly. He seemed to be slightly dissatisfied that his ranking was slightly lower than Xian Hao and the others. His gaze turned towards Yiguchen, and the corner of his mouth curled up into a sneer. He wanted to let Situ Hongxue know that only he was the true prodigy of the sword Dao. In the future, he would be able to sweep through a region with his sword. He was far from someone like Yiguchen, who had appeared out of nowhere, could compare to. Not only Murong Ditian, Chu Qingqi, Situ Hongxue, Situ Ling, Murong Ming, and the other martial practitioners all cast their gazes towards Yiguchen. Among these gazes, there was curiosity, anticipation, coldness, and disdain. Yiguchen, since you have already fallen silent, then stay silent forever. Murong Ming said coldly in his heart. The atmosphere of the entire sword-seeking steel seemed to have frozen. Vaguely, there was an indescribable Dao rhyme spreading. With Yiguchen as the center, it was like a whirlpool. And, this feeling, some martial practitioners were shocked. They seemed to have come into contact with an indescribable Dao rhyme. Then, their gazes all landed on Yiguchen. Sigh, a sigh lightly floated, like a withered leaf falling to the ground. That was Yiguchen. His eyelids trembled slightly, and he opened his eyes. A sense of vicissitudes flashed past his eyes. Yiguchen stood up and looked at the sword-seeking steel. He frowned and pondered. This. Could it be that Yiguchen didn't gain anything? The surrounding martial practitioners looked at Yiguchen's serious expression and couldn't help but guess. As expected. He merely had a fortuitous encounter. Murong Ming laughed, and his heavy heart suddenly relaxed. Murong Ditian was the same. Although he didn't reveal a smile, the bottom of his heart seemed to have faintly relaxed. After all, no Sky Pride wanted to see another Sky Pride overshadow their own brilliance. Unfortunately, that sword ancestor didn't gain anything. I had thought that he could be my opponent. Murong Ditian sighed, as if it was a pity. His voice was not soft. It was obvious that he was talking to Situ Hongxue, who was not far away. Situ Hongshue's brows furrowed slightly, as if she had some doubts. Although she was not sure whether Yi Gu-chen was the one who had kept his skills on the sword testing stone, she was sure that he had great attainments in the art of swordsmanship based on the shocking sword he had displayed before. But right now, Yi Gu-chen actually gained nothing from the Enlightenment Stone. This was somewhat inconceivable. Could it be that Yi Gu-chen was really a silver spear? Such a thought involuntarily appeared in everyone's minds. However, at this moment, Yi Gu-chen wasn't moved by anything. He gazed at the sword-seeking steel, and at the names that were marked with sword scars. Ha! Yi Gu-chen laughed, and his tightly furrowed brows relaxed. What's he laughing at? Has he already given up? Perhaps he knows that he can't leave his name on the sword-seeking steel, so he's using a laugh to demonstrate his embarrassment. Murong Ming's lips curled into a mocking smile. On the other side, Chu Qingqi was also paying close attention. He was still unable to see through Yi Gu-chen's depths. Those who can leave their names on the sword-seeking steel are indeed dragons and phoenixes in the way of the sword, but... Yi Gu-chen suddenly spoke. He paused for a moment, and then a deep and solemn sentence slowly came out of his mouth. Why would I, Yi Gu-chen, need a sword-seeking steel to prove my way of the sword? These words were like a deafening sound that resounded in everyone's ears. These words were like a clap of thunder that stirred up the clouds in the 9 heavens. In an instant, the entire sky sword peak seemed to tremble and rumble, as if the way of the heavens was furious. A powerful and unparalleled sword chi pressure poured out of the sword-seeking steel with a loud bang. This pressure was far stronger than before, and this pressure was only directed at Yi Gu-chen. The others weren't affected at all. What, is Yi Gu-chen crazy? What a terrifying sword pressure. Yi Gu-chen has angered the sword-seeking steel. Some warriors were so shocked that their faces turned pale. They quickly retreated, not daring to get close to the sword-seeking steel. Chu Qingqi, Murong Ditian, Situ Hongxue, and the others also retreated, their eyes fixed on Yi Gu-chen. It should be known that everyone who came to the sword-seeking steel wanted to leave their names on the sword-seeking steel, become famous, and then obtain the opportunity of the sword-seeking steel. However, Yi Gu-chen actually said that his way of the sword didn't need to be proven by the sword-seeking steel. What an arrogant and ignorant Yi Gu-chen. Does he really think of himself as a sword master? Murong Ming sneered. He might explode under the sword pressure of the sword-seeking steel. Murong Ditian's eyes blazed as he said coldly. On the other side, Situ Hongxue slowly clenched her jade-like hands. She was pulled by an unknown and complicated emotion. Was this Yi Gu-chen arrogant or was he truly capable? Boom! The unparalleled sword pressure was like a wave that pressed down on Yi Gu-chen layer by layer. In an instant, Yi Gu-chen felt as if he was hit by thousands of waves. All the bones in his body cracked, and his body that had just recovered a little was seriously injured again. A trace of blood flowed from the corner of Yi Gu-chen's mouth. Golden light bloomed on the surface of his body as he used his Vajra body to resist the sword pressure. Yi Gu-chen had to admit that the person who left behind this sword-seeking steel was indeed a peerless way of the sword expert. However, Yi Gu-chen wasn't just Yi Gu-chen. He was also the sword demon, the Dugu Wubai. The peerless sword demon that had ruled the world for over 40 years and had never tasted defeat. It was absolutely impossible to make this sword demon lower his head and use the sword-seeking steel to prove his way of the sword talent. If I want to prove my way of the sword, is a sword-seeking steel worthy? Yi Gu-chen cracked open his mouth and revealed a blood-stained smile. His calamity dust sword was drawn, and a unique sword rhythm pervaded the air. What exactly does this Yi Gu-chen want to do? Everyone, including Situ Hongxue, was puzzled. Could it be that Yi Gu-chen really wanted to contend against the sword-seeking steel with his own strength? Yi Gu-chen's chi and blood erupted, and the power of dragon and elephant poured out. The 270 sword veins in his body were all activated. At the same time, the 42 vessel veins of the Calamity Dust Sword were also activated. The Broken Edge spiritual pattern and the Violent Thunder spiritual pattern were also activated. Apart from the soul-devouring secret skill and other trump cards, Yiguchin had activated almost all of his skills. Piercing Moon Swordsmanship, Yiguchin drew his sword. It seemed to be the most ordinary Piercing Moon Swordsmanship. However, this sword was simple yet not simple. For any martial artist who had just stepped into the way of the sword, the Piercing Moon Swordsmanship was the most basic sword technique. Some geniuses even disdained to cultivate the Piercing Moon Swordsmanship. However, at this moment, the onlooking sword practitioners, including Murong Ditian, Chu Qingqi, and the others, couldn't see through Yiguchin's sword. It was indeed the Piercing Moon Swordsmanship. However, it didn't seem to be the Piercing Moon Swordsmanship. Could it be? An extremely absurd thought appeared in everyone's mind. If there was only one possibility, it might be because this wasn't the perfect fusion level Piercing Moon Swordsmanship, but transformative level. Chapter 69. The Transformative Realm, as the name suggests, refers to reaching the transformative realm. It is the highest realm of martial arts. Perhaps only the creator of the transformative realm could reach this realm. This realm allows one to go beyond martial arts and create the ultimate move. This was a realm that all martial artists wanted to reach, but it was too difficult. Even a mediocre sword technique like the Piercing Moon Swordsmanship was extremely difficult to cultivate to the transformative realm, let alone a spiritual level sword technique. Moreover, no one would be willing to cultivate a mediocre sword technique for more than 10 years to reach the transformative realm. However, it was even harder to reach the transformative realm for a higher level of martial arts. Therefore, it was considered good for martial artists to cultivate all kinds of martial arts to the small success stage. As for the great success stage, it was even rarer. As for the perfection stage and the transformative realm, not many martial artists were willing to spend too much effort on it. This showed how rare martial arts of the transformative realm were. However, Yiguchin had achieved it. Along with his sword, the most simple Taoist rhymes of the Piercing Moon Swordsmanship filled the air. Everyone was shocked to see that behind Yiguchin, an illusory sea appeared. In the sea, a bright moon rose slowly. This. Are my eyes playing tricks on me? The surrounding martial artists were dumbfounded. They did not expect the common Piercing Moon Swordsmanship to have such a mysterious evolution after reaching the transformative realm. No. That's not a real moon. It's Sword Chi. A swordsman roared. That bright moon was indeed not a moon, but was formed by Sword Chi. A terrifying word appeared in everyone's mind. Sword Chi taking form. Only by practicing a sword technique to the highest level could such an evolution occur. At this level, the power of the sword technique would increase exponentially. This is the ultimate move of the Piercing Moon Swordsmanship. I call it the Sea Rising Bright Moon. Yiguchin swung his sword. The blade was clean, and along with the bright moon, it bombarded the sword-seeking steel. An unprecedented storm of sword chi spread out with a roar, shaking the surroundings and stirring up the wind and clouds. The entire heavenly sword peak seemed to be trembling because of this. Huge rocks fell, and thick cracks spread out. It really is him. Situ Hongshua's beautiful eyes lost focus, and her cherry lips trembled. The moment Yiguchin drew his sword, the intelligent Situ Hongshua instantly understood that the Tao runes of the Piercing Moon sword art would not change. Yiguchin was the one who had held back on the sword testing stone. He was also the only person that Situ Hongshua had ever seen who had perfected his swordsmanship. At this moment, the image of Yiguchin striking with his sword was deeply engraved in Situ Hongshua's heart. Only now did she realize that there really were people in this world who were so devoted to the sword Tao. Yiguchin's figure was infinitely elevated in Situ Hongshua's heart. Transformative stage, damn it. However, even if he is in the transformative stage, he should not be able to destroy the sword-seeking steel. On the other side, Murongditian's expression was unsightly. The ultimate move of the piercing moon sword art in the transformative stage was so powerful that even he was slightly shocked. He thought that he might be able to withstand Yiguchin's sword, but the outcome would be unpredictable. Crack, under everyone's shocked and almost sluggish gaze, the sword-seeking steel slowly spread out with cracks. Is it still not enough? Yiguchin raised his eyebrows. If it is not enough, then, again. Yiguchin's swordsmanship changed again. Streaks of sword marks swept out, as if it was the orbit of the heavens. Gosh, that is a small success stage spiritual sword art. They originally thought that Yiguchin had brought enough shock, but now, Yiguchin actually displayed a spiritual sword art again. Boundless Heaven sword art, and it was a small success stage Boundless Heaven sword art. Yiguchin originally had the talent of Sword Devil, and he was only a little bit away from the small success stage Boundless Heaven sword art. However, on the Tao Comprehending Stone, Yiguchin finally broke the barrier. Boundless Heaven Wheel. The countless sword trajectories that Yiguchin displayed instantly overlapped and turned into an extremely sharp sword wheel that seemed to be able to tear the void apart. Rumble. The power of a spiritual sword art's ultimate move could be seen from Murongditian's sword sweep all directions. However, the Boundless Heaven sword art was of a higher level than the Mysterious Heaven sword art, and its power was naturally one level higher. Boom! After receiving Yiguchin's two ultimate moves, the cracks on the sword-seeking steel rapidly spread. Then, under everyone's astonished gazes, it suddenly exploded. The sword-seeking steel that had towered in the sky sword peak for many years was shattered. Along with the shattering of the sword-seeking steel, the names on the steel naturally turned into dust. At this moment, Murongditian felt a tightness in his chest, and his complexion turned slightly pale. This is... Murongditian clenched his teeth as a thought uncontrollably crept into his mind. He had left his name on the sword-seeking steel, but Yiguchin had shattered the sword-seeking steel. Could it be that he was really inferior to Yiguchin? When this thought appeared, Murongditian instantly bit his lips and regained his clarity. At the same time, his expression was extremely ugly. Inner demon. The moment the sword-seeking steel shattered, a trace of inner demon appeared in Murongditian's heart, and the origin of this inner demon was Yiguchin. With this trace of inner demon, if Murongditian wanted to break through in the future, there would be an additional obstacle. In order to eliminate this inner demon, the only way was to kill Yiguchin. Yiguchin. At this moment, Murongditian had already treated Yiguchin as a thorn in his heart that had to be removed. The moment the sword-seeking steel shattered, the entire heavenly sword peak started to tremble like an awakened huge dragon. At the location of the shattered sword-seeking steel, a mysterious and indescribable formation suddenly lit up. In a split second, Yiguchin's figure disappeared in a divine radiance. This. Everyone was shocked and felt baffled for a moment. Looking around, only the shattered remains of the sword-seeking steel remained. The sword-seeking steel that had many sword geniuses engraved on it was only left with a pile of remains. Many people guessed that Yiguchin might have activated the formation of the exceptional expert who had left behind the sword-seeking steel, and had been obliterated. There were also people who said that it was something similar to a spatial formation, and Yiguchin had obtained an opportunity. However, no matter what, the battle at the sword-seeking steel would definitely spread throughout the entire Beichun prefecture, and even the surrounding prefectures. As for the sword sect's Yiguchin, who had disappeared from everyone's sight, he would once again enter everyone's sight. After Yiguchin disappeared, the entire heavenly sword peak quietened down. The sword-seeking steel had also been destroyed, and would no longer burst forth with sword chi. Many martial practitioners also left with their hearts that had yet to calm down. Hongxue, let's go as well. Forcefully suppressing the surging emotions in his heart, Murongditian said to Situ Hongxue. I want to stay here. Situ Hongxue did not bother about Murongditian, and directly sat down cross-legged. A trace of deep viciousness flashed past Murong Ditian's eyes, and he said coldly, that Yiguchen might already be dead. Situ Hongxue acted as if she did not hear anything. Murong Ditian clenched his fist, took a deep breath, flicked his sleeves, and left. At the same time, he said, not long later, it will be our wedding day. It's better to make some preparations. Situ Hongxue closed her eyes, but her brows were slightly knitted. She did not know why, but only the lonely figure of Yiguchen remained in her heart. If there was really someone who could be called a swordsman in this world, it would probably be Yiguchen. Situ Hongxue thought in her heart. On the other side, Chu Qingqi had originally planned to investigate Yiguchen's whereabouts. However, when he thought that Yiguchen would probably participate in the 10 prefectures elite gathering, he directly left. He wanted to spread this news to the inner court as soon as possible. At this moment, only Situ Hongxue was left in the entire Heavenly Sword Peak. At this moment, Yiguchen was in a strange space. Chapter 70. When the divine light rose, Yiguchen felt as if the surrounding void was distorted. The next moment, he came to a strange space. Yiguchen had already expected such an unforeseen event. In fact, Yiguchen had noticed it the moment he saw the sword-seeking steel. The sword-seeking steel was not so much a place of opportunity as it was a place of test. Under the sword-seeking steel, on the Enlightenment Stone, one could comprehend one's own way of the sword. Only those who truly understood the way of the sword could break this barrier. And the sword-seeking steel was this barrier. With the sword demon's vision, he saw through it at a glance, so he did not hesitate to break the sword-seeking steel with his sword. Yiguchen looked around and sized up this strange space. He saw that the sky was high and the earth was deep, as if it was a real world. But Yiguchen knew that it was not the case. The reason for that was because he had sensed an intense sword aura that filled the entire area. Even the grass and trees contained sword aura. He casually picked up a small pebble under his feet. The pebble shook with a loud rumble, and a miniature sword chi burst out. This world is full of sword chi. An absolute expert of the way of the sword. Just as Yiguchen was thinking to himself, the sky suddenly changed color. The rolling clouds surged and turned into countless cyan sword chi in the blink of an eye. That scene was like a rain of swords falling from the sky. Rumble. As if the way of the heavens was angry, countless cyan sword chi fell like rain. Yiguchen's eyes shone with divine light. He held the tribulation dust in his hand and was fearless. Is this also one of the tests? Yiguchen was fearless. He performed his swordsmanship. The sea behind him overturned and a bright moon rose. Bright moon rising from the sea. This was a move that turned something rotten into something magical. He comprehended the true essence of sword chi with the most inferior moon-piercing swordsmanship. Clang. Continuous sounds of collisions rang out. The bright moon of sword chi wrapped around Yiguchen's body. Countless green sword chi fell densely, bursting forth with countless explosions. However, how could a person fight against the heavens? Even the piercing moon sword technique's ultimate technique could not withstand the endless rain of swords. Finally, with a loud bang, the bright moon of sword chi exploded. Countless green sword chi rained down on Yiguchen's body like thousands of swords. Countless wounds appeared on Yiguchen's body. What was even more bizarre was that the green sword chi seemed to have a life of its own as it entered Yiguchen's body through the wounds. In a split second, Yiguchen felt as if his flesh and blood were about to split apart. That was a sword chi that could cut through metal and jade, yet it penetrated into his body and tore apart his tendons, flesh, bones, and blood. For a moment, Yiguchen spat out a mouthful of blood. His entire body was blood red, and he looked extremely terrifying. However, even though he was severely injured, Yiguchen's expression did not change much. He sat cross-legged on the ground, his hands forming the heart-concentrating spell. At the same time, his blood and chi surged and his profound chi cleansed, trying to force out the green sword chi. However, in this confrontation, Yiguchen was clearly at a disadvantage. Just as Yiguchen's life was in danger, the mysterious Thunder Tribulation sword that had been silent for a long time in his body suddenly released endless lightning that flowed along Yiguchen's tendons and veins. When the green sword chi came into contact with the lightning, it was like a mouse coming into contact with a cat. It was afraid that it would be too late to avoid it. In this process, Yiguchen suddenly realized that some of the green sword chi had been integrated into his body by the power of the Thunder Tribulation sword. Moreover, Yiguchen realized that under the tug of the green sword chi and the lightning, some of the sword veins in his body had actually opened up again. 270, 273, 300, finally, at a certain moment, 360 sword veins appeared in Yiguchen's body. When the last sword vein was formed, Yiguchen's body suddenly shook. Immediately, an extremely powerful aura was released from his body. Golden light surged on the surface of Yiguchen's body. The white sword veins turned golden in an instant. 360 golden sword veins formed a complete major circulation. At this moment, Yiguchen's cultivation of the first volume of the Universal Sword Codex had reached perfection. Boom! Yiguchen held the Thunder Tribulation sword and roared to the sky. Endless green sword chi entered his body. When the green sword chi entered Yiguchen's body, it was suppressed by the Thunder Tribulation sword and the golden sword veins. Yiguchen's aura climbed to the peak of the 9th level of the Essence Origin realm. As long as Yiguchen wanted to, he could break through to the Chi refining realm. However, Yiguchen suppressed the feeling of breaking through. He formed a seal with his hands and started to cultivate the other body tempering technique besides the muscle tendon changing scripture. Marrow cleansing scripture. Yiguchen wanted to use the green sword chi here to cleanse his organs and bones and cultivate the marrow cleansing scripture. At this moment, the scene was shocking. The sky was overturned. The sword chi was like rain, forming a sword chi storm. In the center of the storm was Yiguchen, who was sitting cross-legged with his eyes closed. With the double suppression of the Thunder Tribulation sword and the golden sword veins, the green sword chi could not cause any trouble in Yiguchen's body. Instead, after cleansing Yiguchen's organs and bones, the green sword chi quietly merged into his body. Yiguchen was also keenly aware that there seemed to be a trace of sword essence in every cyan sword chi. Although this strand of sword intent was extremely minute, it should be known that the boundless sword rain that filled the sky contained a strand of sword intent within each strand of sword chi. This kind of method was a bit terrifying. Yiguchen was sure that this method could only be performed by the peerless sword principle expert who left behind the sword-seeking steel. After an unknown period of time, Yiguchen's bones were covered with a faint layer of green and gold. Although it was very painful to cleanse the organs and bones with the green sword chi, the effect was very significant. If the muscle tendon changing scripture was to cultivate the tendons and meridians, then the marrow cleansing scripture was to cultivate the organs and bones. Although Yiguchen's Vajra body was powerful, it only cultivated the skin and tendons. The internal organs were easy to be injured. However, if he succeeded in cultivating the marrow cleansing scripture, Yiguchen's internal organs and bones would be undamaged. Only when both methods were cultivated to perfection could Yiguchen cultivate the legendary Vajra body in the Jianghu in his previous life. Now, Yiguchen had taken a big step forward. No, I can't absorb any more green sword chi. At a certain moment, Yiguchen opened his eyes, which were shining with green light. He noticed the bottleneck in his body. Although his body was strong, his cultivation was only at the peak of the 9th level of the Essence Origin realm. He could not absorb any more green sword chi. If he wanted to absorb more green sword chi, he could only wait for Yiguchen to make another breakthrough. Maybe it was because there were more green sword chi in his body, but the sword chi in the sky did not attack Yiguchin anymore. Not bad. Suddenly, a voice sounded in the sky. It was a calm voice. Yiguchin was shocked. He focused his eyes and looked at the source of the voice. It was a middle-aged man in simple coarse clothes. His face was so ordinary that there was nothing special about it. He was the kind of person who could not be recognized in a crowd. However, it was such an ordinary man who was surrounded by the green sword chi in the sky like an obedient pet. Such a scene, no matter how ordinary his face was, became extraordinary. Chapter 71. Are you the owner of the swordsmanship-seeking steel? Yiguchin asked in a serious tone. This figure was the mysterious figure who had released the sacred sword of heaven and earth when Yiguchin resonated with the sword chi outside the swordsmanship-seeking steel. Smart kid, you're right. I'm the one who left the swordsmanship-seeking steel, but now I'm just a consciousness doppelganger. The middle-aged man's tone was gentle and calm. Who are you? Yiguchin asked. You can call me. The middle-aged man smiled and said. The 8th generation sword master, Yi Tianqing. The 8th generation sword master, Yi Tianqing. Yiguchin frowned. Although he looked calm on the surface, there was a surge of shock in his heart. Sword sect, this was a name that he couldn't be more familiar with. The title of young sword master, the sword sect pagoda forest, and the 8th generation sword master. All of these were like many intertwined threads. Yiguchin seemed to have vaguely touched some of the veins. Did you think of something? Yes, the competition for the title of sword master in the Saint Origin dynasty was created by me. Yi Tianqing said lightly. Why? Vaguely, Yiguchin seemed to have sensed a trap. Alas. Yi Tianqing sighed and said, things change and calamities arise again. There are many things that cannot be said, but you only need to know that I'm selecting the 9th generation successor. Sure enough, Yiguchin's eyes flashed. He was not surprised at all. The swordsmanship-seeking steel was obviously a test. However, Yiguchin had no intention of being anyone's successor. He was originally arrogant. Even in this world, Yiguchin did not think that anyone could be his master. Sorry, Yiguchin wanted to say something, but Yi Tianqing interrupted him with a smile. Don't be in a hurry to refuse. You won the title of young sword master and passed the first test of the swordsmanship-seeking steel. You've already joined the 9th generation sword master sequence. Sequence? Yiguchin sensed that things were not as simple as he thought. That's right, the 9th generation of the echelon. In the entire South Horizon region, in the endless lands of the various dynasties and hidden forces, the so-called geniuses are as numerous as carps crossing the river. As for swordsmanship geniuses, they are as numerous as the stars in the sky. Even 7th-ranked geniuses like you, though rare, are not rare. At the very least, there is no lack of 7th-grade heavens favorites and even 10th-grade heavens favorites in the other testing grounds left behind by our sect. 10th grade, Yiguchin was speechless. A 7th-grade heavens pride like him was hard to find in the Saint Origin dynasty, let alone a 10th-grade heavens pride. A 10th-grade prodigy was already considered a paragon among the prodigies. That was why they were called 10th-grade supreme prodigies. In the entire South Horizon region, it was hard to find more than 2 or 3 people like that. In the future, when they grew up, they would be peerless experts who could stir up a storm in the 9 zones. Thus, entering the 9th generation of the echelon does not mean that you have a master. Instead, it is a test and tempering. Once you enter the 9th generation of the echelon, there is no need for you to take me as your master. All you need to do is to defeat the successors of the other echelons and become the true 9th generation Sword Grandmaster. Then, you can accept the Sword Grandmaster's mandate of heaven, said Yi Tianqing. Sword Sect's Tianming. Yi Guchen was puzzled. This is too far away for you, so let's not talk about it for now. You broke the sword-seeking steel and entered our sect's heavenly path sword realm. I didn't expect that you would be able to obtain 3,000 heaven-ripping sword souls. Yi Tianqing smiled faintly and shook his head. This green sword chi is called the heaven-ripping sword soul. Yi Guchen slowly raised his hand and a green sword chi spurted out. The heaven-ripping sword soul was condensed by our sect's heavenly path sword essence and the heavenly path sword chi above the 9 heavens. Now, you can only hold 3,000 sword souls. In this heavenly path sword realm, there are a total of 108,000 sword souls. Although I don't know how you managed to suppress 3,000 sword souls, your current strength is far from being able to control 3,000 sword souls. Hearing Yi Tianqing's words, Yi Guchen could not help but secretly nod his head. Although he used 3,000 heaven-ripping sword souls to open 360 sword veins in his body, that was all there was to it. With his current cultivation, it was already good enough that he could unleash over 100 heaven-ripping sword souls at the same time. The 108,000 heaven-ripping sword souls is our sect's unique skill. Although the sacred sword of heaven and earth that you used to comprehend the sword chi was left behind by our sect, it was a unique skill created by the 7th generation sword master, Yi Tianqing said faintly. The 7th generation sword master. Yi Guchen vaguely sensed that it seemed to be an extremely ancient inheritance. Ah, all in all, you don't have to think so much now. Becoming the 9th generation sword master and seizing the identity of the 9th generation sword master is absolutely harmless to people like you who pursue sword principle. Not only will you have the opportunity to learn the unique skills of the various generations of sword masters, but you will also have the opportunity to glimpse the shadow of the famed Archean swords. Yi Tianqing's words really made Yi Guchen's heart waver. As a sword fanatic, the unique skills of sword masters and the famed Archean swords were absolutely irresistible temptations. Yi Guchen really wanted to experience the earth-shattering power of the famed Archean swords that were ranked at the pinnacle of this world. I'm willing to become the 9th generation sword master. Yi Guchen's eyes were clear as he stood proudly. All right. Yi Tianqing suddenly pointed his finger, and a divine light landed on Yi Guchen. Yi Guchen's expression changed slightly. He raised his arm, and a green sword mark vaguely appeared on the back of his hand near his thumb. This is the emblem of the 9th generation sword master. It represents the qualification to compete for the title of the 9th generation sword master. If you meet the other 9th generation sword masters in the future, this emblem will sense it, Yi Tianqing said. Then how can I truly obtain the inheritance of the 9th generation sword master? Yi Guchen asked. It's very simple. You can become the 9th generation sword master by obtaining the emblems of all the other sword masters and obtaining the acknowledgement of the 1st generation sword master. There are 2 ways to obtain the emblems. One is to kill, and the other is to make the other sword masters submit and hand over their emblems willingly, Yi Tianqing said. Yi Guchen shook his head slightly when he heard this. It was not that simple. Not to mention the will of the 1st generation sword sect for now, just defeating or even killing all the other heirs of the sequence was an almost impossible task. Yi Tianqing had also said that there were even 10th grade supreme talents among the sword masters who had obtained the right to enter the sword masters. To put it bluntly, Yi Guchen's archenemy, Gu Xiaoyang of Starry Sword Pavilion, was probably inferior to those people. However, Yi Guchen was not afraid at all. Only such a challenge could gradually awaken the sword demon that had been dormant for a long time. Since you have become the 9th generation sword master, you can refine all the 108,000 heaven-splitting sword souls here if you have the ability. As for the other unique skills of the sword master, you will naturally obtain them in the future if you have the opportunity. The mission of the sword-seeking tablet is over, and my consciousness will also dissipate. Remember, even if you are just a sword master, do not bring shame to the name of the sword master. After finishing his last sentence, Yi Tianqing's consciousness turned into specks of light and dissipated. The sword master. Yi Guchen muttered to himself. He felt as if he had uncovered a corner of the mystery of the sword Tao in this world. It seems that there will be a lot of twists and turns in the future. However, this is what I want. Yi Guqin gently stroked the green sword-shaped emblem and smiled faintly. He was not afraid of the so-called 10th grade supreme talents. As long as he had enough time, the so-called supreme talents could be defeated with one sword strike. Chapter 72. In the Heavenly Path Sword Realm, Yi Guqin could be said to have gained a lot. He used the heaven-splitting sword soul to open up all 360 sword veins and also used it to cultivate the marrow-cleansing scripture, increasing the strength of his body again. The most important thing was that Yi Guqin had obtained 3,000 heaven-splitting sword souls. Yi Guqin had personally experienced the power of the heaven-splitting sword souls. Thousands of sword souls fell like a torrential downpour. Even if thousands of people besieged them, they were not afraid at all. Moreover, the heaven-splitting sword souls could enter a person's body and cause great damage. This could be said to be another trump card of Yi Guqin's. However, with Yi Guqin's current cultivation, not to mention the 108,000 sword souls, even the 3,000 sword souls in his body could not be fully mobilized. However, one could imagine that if Yi Guqin mastered the 108,000 heaven-splitting sword souls in the future, the power would definitely be earth-shattering. After all, it was the unique skill of the sword faction. The only thing that Yi Guqin felt a little pity was that he did not obtain the sacred sword of heaven and earth. Yi Guqin, who had personally used that sword, naturally knew the terrifying power that could split the heavens and earth. Unfortunately, the sacred sword of heaven and earth was the unique skill of the 7th generation sword faction master. However, Yi Guqin believed that if he could obtain the 108,000 heaven-splitting sword souls here, its power would not be weaker than the sacred sword of heaven and earth. After all, the 8th generation sword faction master, Yi Tianqing's attainment was not inferior to that of the 7th generation sword faction master. After this matter was settled, Yi Guqin glanced at the sky. The heaven-splitting sword souls that had returned to silence once again turned into flowing clouds in the sky. Yi Guqin's mind moved, and the sequence emblem on the back of his hand burned slightly. His body was wrapped in a ball of power and sent away from this place. On the sky sword peak, under the remains of the swords seeking steel, a divine light flashed and disappeared. Yi Guqin's figure appeared. He looked around, and just when he thought that everyone had left, a snow-white figure appeared in his line of sight. Her figure was slender like a fairy, her ink-black hair was like satin that draped over her shoulders, and her jade-white face seemed as if it was carved out by the hands of the heavens. She usually carried an icy cold gaze, but at this moment, when she looked at Yi Guqin, a trace of imperceptible joy actually appeared in her eyes. "It's him." Yi Guqin's expression did not change. Everything he encountered in the heavenly Tao sword realm was clearly a secret that could not be divulged. The current Yi Guqin did not have the ability to challenge those mysterious and powerful 9th generation sequences. Situ Hongxue walked over with light steps. Her eyes moved as she looked at Yi Guqin. She was intelligent and didn't ask Yi Guqin any unnecessary questions. Instead, she opened her mouth and said with a voice as delicate as jade, "The person who left a move on the sword testing stone was young Master Yi, right?" Yi Guqin suddenly understood. After thinking for a moment, he understood and nodded slightly. "So it was you." Hongxue has long heard of young Master Ye's reputation as the sword master. "I've long wanted to meet you in person, but..." Situ Hongxue said and paused slightly. "But later, it was said that my sword vein was destroyed and my sword embryo was taken away, and I became a useless person, right?" Yi Guqin did not mind and made it clear. Situ Hongxue blushed a little. Obviously, she was right. So what if I'm a genius or a useless person? As long as I have a sword in my heart, I will always be Yi Guqin of the Sword Master. Yi Guqin put his hands behind his back and said casually and calmly. It was such a person who turned the moon-piercing sword art into something magical and practiced it to the realm of sword chi. It was such a person who cut off the arm of the infamous blood saber Mo Juechen with a stunning sword move. It was such a person who dared to destroy the sword-seeking steel and break the barrier that others did not dare to break. Situ Hongxue felt that Yi Guqin was different from the young talents she had met in the past. Although there was still a trace of youthful arrogance in his eyes, there was more of a kind of understanding that saw through everything. It was hard to imagine that such a vision and temperament would appear in a 17-year-old youth. At this moment, Situ Hongshue's heart was slightly at a loss. Then, she seemed to have thought of something and immediately said without hesitation, "Young Master Yi, can you teach Hongxue swordsmanship?" Yi Guqin frowned slightly, seeming to find it troublesome. Seeing Yi Guqin's expression, Situ Hongxue could not help but puff her cheeks slightly. It should be known that a beauty like Situ Hongxue would usually break their heads to see her. If they could spend some time together, it would be like a gift from the heavens. But now, Situ Hongxue took the initiative to ask, and Yi Guqin actually looked slightly annoyed. This was a treatment that Situ Hongxue had never experienced before. Even though she was usually as cold as a goddess, she couldn't help but doubt her own charm like a little girl at this moment. Yi Guqin looked at Situ Hongxue, who was like a young girl in a fit of pique, and was slightly stunned. It had to be said that at this moment, Situ Hongxue had an indescribable charm. She was like a goddess from the ninth heaven who had descended to the mortal world. With all the thoughts of a girl, she was shockingly beautiful and cute. But unfortunately, whether it was the sword demon in his previous life or Yi Guqin in this life, neither of them had any interest in women. Sword Dao was their only pursuit. However, Yi Guqin did not intend to refuse after thinking about it. He already felt that Situ Hongxue was extraordinarily intelligent. Otherwise, she would not have left behind some pointers on the sword testing stone. And practicing the way of the sword was not to be stubborn. It required communication and discussion. Although Situ Hongshue's understanding of the way of the sword might be far inferior to Yi Guqin's, she definitely had some shining points that could give Yi Guqin some inspiration. Okay. Under Situ Hongshue's slightly bitter gaze, Yi Guqin nodded slightly. In the next few days, Yi Guqin and Situ Hongxue both trained in the great desolate forest. Swish! A wisp of sword light brushed past like a spring breeze, but it contained a fatal sharpness. A black water leopard suddenly became alert. Its figure flickered, and its hind leg was slashed by the sword light. Letting out a whimper, the black water leopard was like a streak of black light, wanting to flee to another place. Swish! A wisp of sword light was like lightning, directly striking the center of the black water leopard's head, and it was completely dead. In the dense forest, the two walked out. Yi Guqin glanced at the black water leopard lying on the ground and said, "The 4 seasons swordsmanship is about comprehending the true essence of the 4 seasons. Spring, wind and rain should be a killing move hidden under gentleness." The sharpness of your sword light was not well hidden, so the black water leopard was alerted. Otherwise, you could have killed it with one strike. Situ Hongxue nodded. Your sword is too slow. Your sword does not have a perfect fusion and transformation. Your sword moves should be as smooth as flowing water, without a trace of jerkiness. With Yi Guqin's repeated reminders, Situ Hongshue's understanding of the way of the sword also gradually deepened. Finally, at a certain moment, facing a fire spirit python, Situ Hongxue held Wang Ningmei in her hand and attacked. When the sword was unleashed, it actually turned into 4 sword shadows. One was like the spring wind and rain. One was like the blazing summer sun. One was like the autumn wind rustling. One was like the cold winter. It was the lesser ultimate move of the 4 seasons swordsmanship, the 4 seasons sword shadow. At this moment, Situ Hongshue's spiritual level swordsmanship had also reached the initial success stage. The 4 seasons sword shadow instantly tore the fire spirit python's beast body apart. Situ Hongxue was in a daze, as if she still did not dare to believe it. The bottleneck of the initial success stage of the spiritual level swordsmanship was broken through just like that. Chapter 73. This was simply like a dream. One must know that the standard to measure a sword genius was to see if they had cultivated a spirit-grade sword technique to the initial stage. For example, Limitless Sword Sects Xian Hao, Sword Sects Talon Yen Wushuang, as well as the royal families Yuan Mia and other geniuses, they had all cultivated at least one spirit-grade sword technique to the initial stage. Only then would they have the strength to crush ordinary geniuses. And now, Situ Hongxue had also reached this level. Perhaps she was temporarily unable to compare with Xian Hao and the others, but who could say for sure in the future? Especially with the guidance of a sword master like Yi Guqin. Even some of the sword cultivator seniors in the Situ family were far from Yi Guqin in terms of sword comprehension. Congratulations. Yi Guqin smiled faintly. Although it was him who helped Situ Hongxue to break through, he himself also had some gains in these few days of cultivation. Young Master Yi, thank you. Situ Hongxue looked at Yi Guqin with her beautiful eyes. He was like a riddle that Situ Hongxue was deeply immersed in, and she wanted to find out the hidden secret. When this thought appeared in her mind, Situ Hongxue moaned, and her charming face was dyed with a layer of faint crimson. Situ Hongxue, who was known as a genius, almost never revealed such an expression in front of the opposite sex. She couldn't help but bite her lips, not knowing what to do for a moment. Seeing the beauty's anxious expression, Yi Guqin also didn't know what was going on. He had never been close to a woman in his previous life, so he naturally didn't understand the countless twists and turns of a woman's mind. However, Situ Hongxue's rarely seen feminine side was something that only he had the fortune to see. Even when facing her fiancé, Murong Ditian, Situ Hongxue still maintained a cold and detached look. Both sides have gained something from the exchange of sword techniques. You don't have to thank me. Yi Guqin said faintly. Rumble, Yi Guqin was stunned when he heard the sound of hunger coming from his stomach. He looked at Situ Hongxue. Qi refining realm martial artists had yet to achieve anidia, so they naturally needed to eat. Situ Hongxue's delicate face instantly turned fiery red. She lowered her head slightly, like a little girl who had done something wrong. Heh! Yi Guqin laughed. He had always heard that Situ Hongxue was an icy beauty, but it was rare for her to reveal such a cute and naive look. Yi Guqin immediately began to prepare the corpse of the fire spirit python. Sword Demon, who had always lived in seclusion in the mountains, was naturally skilled in cooking game. Although there were no seasonings, the fire spirit python's flesh was like crystal jade under the roasting of the bonfire. It was glistening with oil and sizzling sounds, and it looked very tempting. Situ Hongxue, who was sitting obediently to the side, cautiously looked at Yi Guqin, and then looked at the roasted python meat. Originally, Situ Hongxue wanted to prepare a meal to thank Yi Guqin. However, as the proud daughter of the Situ family, she had almost never done any chores except for cultivation. After roasting a piece of python meat, Situ Hongxue sat obediently to the side. It's ready to eat. Yi Guqin handed the roasted golden python meat to Situ Hongxue. Situ Hong's fingers were as white as snow, and her eating posture was also extremely graceful. However, after tasting the first mouthful of meat, her posture relaxed, and she continuously stuffed her captivating red little mouth with sparkling and translucent python meat. Yi Guqin casually ate and looked at Situ Hongxue, and for a moment, he sighed in his heart. This sigh did not come from Situ Hongxue, but from Yi Guqin's discovery. Since his rebirth, it seemed that there was only cultivation, fighting, and killing. There were very few times like this, where he quietly sat, looked at the bonfire, and ate. It seemed that all along, Yi Guqin's heart had been stretched taut. Although there was nothing wrong with working hard to cultivate, blindly cultivating without adjusting one's state of mind would cause problems in the long run. For example, right now, Yiguchen and Situ Hongxue were sitting by the bonfire, casually eating. Yiguchen felt that his heart was as calm as a lake. In his previous life, he had no one to accompany him, only the divine eagle. It was the same at that time, sitting on the peak of a mountain, lighting a bonfire, and eating roasted meat. Yiguchen suddenly closed his eyes, and his thoughts drifted away. His past life and present life intertwined, and for a moment, he sighed, as if he were in a dream. Suddenly, Situ Hongxue stopped eating, and her beautiful eyes turned to Yiguchen. Yiguchen was sitting cross-legged with his eyes closed, and a faint Taoist rhyme spread out. This Taoist rhyme was simple, plain, and natural. And in Yiguchen's body, the 360 golden sword veins began to quietly circulate, and a mysterious force gradually gathered along the sword veins. If one could see through Yiguchen's body, they would discover that the source of the 360 sword veins was Yiguchen's heart. As the power gathered and circulated in the sword veins, it finally gathered at Yiguchen's heart. At this moment, Yiguchen's heart seemed to be plated with a layer of golden powder, and it was shining brilliantly, overflowing with light and color. In the depths of his heart, the power of the sword veins gathered, and in the end, it turned into a golden seed. This golden seed was filled with dense sword-based Taoist rhyme, and it was quite mysterious. After an unknown period of time, Yiguchen suddenly opened his eyes, and his eyes were as bright as the sword radiance. At this moment, even with Yiguchen's calm temperament, he couldn't help but smile. He didn't expect Yiguchen's accidental comprehension to make a breakthrough in the great sword scripture. The golden seed in Yiguchen's heart was the sword heart seed recorded in the second volume of the great sword scripture. The first volume of the Great Sword Scripture condensed the sword veins, and the second volume cultivated the sword heart. And the sword heart seed was the starting point for honing the sword heart. When the sword heart seed completely took root, sprouted, bloomed, and bore fruit, and merged with the heart, it meant that Yiguchen had completed the cultivation of the sword heart. However, at this moment, even though it was just the beginning of the sword heart seed, Yiguchen could feel that his understanding of the sword principle had taken a big step forward. With the help of the sword heart seed, Yiguchen could guarantee that any Xiantian sword principle would be cultivated to the great achievement, or even to the perfection level. It was even possible for him to reach the perfection level. Even if it was a spiritual level sword principle, with the help of the sword heart seed, Yiguchen's comprehension speed would be much faster than before. Any king-level cultivation skill had its outstanding points, and the second volume of the Great Sword Scripture was a king-level cultivation skill. This cultivation skill wasn't about attacking, but about comprehending swordsmanship. It brought Yiguchen a qualitative leap. It could be said that for some sword cultivators, the value of this king-level cultivation skill was comparable to that of a royal-level cultivation skill. Yiguchen was curious. To be able to inherit a cultivation skill like the Great Sword Scripture, how powerful was the force that Yiguchen and his father were in? However, this was not what Yiguchen needed to consider at the moment. Master Yi, you. Situ Hongxue, who was standing aside, looked surprised. She could vaguely feel that Yiguchen was in an epiphany. After the epiphany, Yiguchen looked even more unfathomable. It's nothing. I just had a small breakthrough. Yiguchen smiled faintly. Is that so? Situ Hongxue said. At the same time, she had mixed feelings about Yiguchen. She had always thought that she was a genius in sword principle. However, after meeting Yiguchen, she realized that there was always someone better than her. If he could have an epiphany just by eating barbecued meat, what else was impossible? You're tuning in to the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.